Dear listeners, welcome back to our familiar time slot today through a deeply propley special confession titled, I was just banned from my fiancé's house over Alexevan Batted. Medical reports stating I'd struggled to conceive, only for a single father to bring his young daughter to me and offer, You are unmarried. I no longer have a blessed wife. Why don't we try living together? I thought for 3 seconds and nodded. In acceptance. Who would have thought that 2 months later, a hospital visit for stomach pains would leave me utterly stunned? If you find yourself sympathizing with this story, please share your thoughts in the comments below the video. Also, don't forget to give this untold story a like and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to more highly emotional, real-life stories every day. The white medical report lay in the middle of the coffee shop table like a death sentence, whilst the woman sitting opposite me looked at it with gloating eyes, acting as if she had just discovered a defective product in a supermarket. I still vividly remember that afternoon. Outside, the glaring London sun beat down on Marylebone High Street so brightly it blinded the eyes, whilst inside the cafe, the air conditioning was so freezing my hands went numb, yet a thin layer of cold sweat drenched my spine. Damien sat next to his mother, his pale blue shirt neatly ironed, silver-rimmed, glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. He looked as polite and respectable as he did every day, only his eyes had avoided mine from the moment I walked in. My name is Eleanor, 30 years old, an obstetrics and gynecology consultant at St. Jude's Maternity and Women's Hospital. 5 years ago, when Damien and I were just two impoverished university students, he once held my hand under the porch of our student halls and said, In the future, you just focus on treating patients and saving lives. Leave the house, the mortgage, and the dinners too. Me. I believed that sentence just as I believed in the prescriptions I carefully wrote for my patients with logic, with foundation, with hope. 5 years passed. I went from being a junior doctor to the consultant in charge of the fertility and endocrine clinic. Meanwhile, Damien went from being a probationary employee at a medical equipment firm to a sharply dressed, well-spoken regional sales manager. We had planned to get married by the end of the year, had gone ring shopping, and debated whether to rent a flat near the hospital or near his office. Yet, today, the thing lying between us was not a wedding invitation, nor a wedding budget spreadsheet, but a diagnostic report I had hidden very deeply in my drawer. Polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, endocrine disorder, lower than average, chance of conception, requiring long-term monitoring and lifestyle adjustments. Damien's mother, Mrs. Harrington, tapped her manicured fingernail against the 14 edge of the paper. That tap-tap sound was drier and colder than a stainless steel spoon hitting a glass of ice. She looked me up and down, her eyes unable to hide her contempt. Eleanor, you're a gynecologist. I'm sure you understand this paper better than I do. Tell me honestly, how long were you planning to hide this from our family? My throat choked up, not because I was ashamed of my condition, but because that piece of paper was supposed to be in a private drawer in my flat, tucked inside. My personal medical file. The only person other than me who had a key to that flat was Damien. I turned to look at him, waiting for an explanation. A shake of the head, even just a tiny whisper of please don't say any more. But Damien only looked down, stirring a black coffee where the ice had completely melted. His spoon swirled in meaningless circles, as if the thing being dissected on the table was not his fiancé's dignity. Mrs. Harrington, I tried to keep my voice calm, my 2 hands clasped tightly, together under the table. The doctor only concluded that it's harder to conceive than normal, not that I am infertile. This condition can be managed with medication, diet, rest, and endocrine monitoring, which I am actively undergoing. Mrs. Harrington let out a harsh laugh, the sound so sharp that a few people at the next table turned to look. Don't call me Mrs. Harrington in such an intimate tone. Our family only has Damien as the sole son. He is 31 years old. He doesn't have the time to gamble with your womb. People marry wives to build a scion home, to have children and grandchildren, not to bring back a doctor who spends her days helping others give birth, whilst she herself has no idea when she 10. Every word she dropped was hard and heavy. How many patients had sat in front of me crying from the pressure of having children, from the thoughtless words of, their husbands from the scrutinizing glares of their mothers-in-law. I had advised all of them to slow down, to follow the right treatment, and not to view themselves as a mistake. I had spoken those words to others with all the conviction of a doctor. Yet, when I was the one pushed into this corner of the table, I finally understood that there are insults that do not make a person bleed, but cause the entire chest to ache as if someone were crushing it. Damien placed his spoon down. The sound of metal clinking against glass was soft, but enough to make me look up at him with my last shred of hope. He exhaled, looking exhausted, like a man forced to deal with an annoying chore. Eleanor, don't escalate things. My mother's words are a bit harsh, but she has a point. We've loved each other for 5 years. We've tried, we've waited. I can't let my mother down forever. I looked at the man who had once hugged me in the hospital corridor after a Laco night shift, who had rubbed my shoulders when I was so tired I fell asleep on the tube. The man who once said, "I love you because you live decently." The face was still familiar, but the words that had just spilled out were so alien I felt as though a complete stranger was sitting in front of me. "We've tried?" I asked, my voice turning hoarse. "Damien, the doctor scheduled tests for both of us. Every single time you said you were busy. You said men don't need pointless tests. Do you remember?" Damien's face briefly flushed with embarrassment, but Mrs. Harrington immediately cut in, her voice rising. "Don't you drag my son into this. The men in our family are perfectly healthy. From childhood to now, when has he ever had a disease? This paper has your name on it. The illness is yours, don't drag others down into the mud with you. In my profession, there is no concept of a man definitely being healthy just because he looks healthy on the outside, and there is certainly no such thing as infertility solely being the woman's fault. But a cafe is not a clinic, and the people sitting in front of me didn't come to listen to medical science. They came to pass a sentence. Mrs. Harrington opened her handbag, took out a thick envelope, placed it on the plaza's table, and slid it towards me. The envelope was slightly bulging. Inside was probably cash or a bank check. "Here is £20,000. Consider it our family's compensation for your past few years. Take it, and from now on, don't look for Damien anymore, and don't go speaking nonsense that could affect our family's reputation. Honestly speaking, you are still young. Who knows? You might still find someone who doesn't care about having children, but our family simply cannot." I stared at that envelope for a very long time. £20,000 in exchange for 5 years of my youth. In exchange for the dinners I cooked waiting for Damien to return from client meetings, for the times I worked 2 4-hour shifts, yet still managed to listen to him complain about his company, for the Christmases I stayed in London alone because he said his mother wasn't ready to make our relationship public. It turned out that in their eyes, affection could be packaged as a timely expense, offered to make someone shut their mouth. "Do you also want me to take this money?" I asked. Damien no longer trembled. He pursed his lips and looked away. "Eleanor, don't be stubborn. It's better for us to break up peacefully. I'm truly tired." Something inside me snapped very softly. It wasn't loud. It didn't explode. It was just a fragment of trust falling and shattering into tiny, unrecoverable pieces. I stood up, grabbed my handbag from the chair, and looked directly at the mother and son. "Keep this money to pay for your son's future wedding. As for you, Damien, today I finally understand that for the past 5 years it wasn't that I wasn't good enough, but that you never had enough courage to stand by my side." Mrs. Harrington scowled, perhaps not expecting that I wouldn't cry and beg. She scoffed coldly, "Don't play the noble victim. A woman who cannot bear children, no matter how successful, is just a barren tree. I'll wait and see who dares to marry you in the future." That sentence chased me all the way to the door of the cafe. Outside, the sun hit my face, stinging sharply. The sound of black cabs, bus horns, and people chattering outside merged into a thick, buzzing noise. I walked along the fair pavement, my familiar flat shoes suddenly feeling as hard as stone, every step shooting pain through the soles of my feet. I didn't know how long I had been walking when the phone in my pocket buzzed frantically. The screen showed the name Chloe, the head nurse of my ward. As soon as I answered, Chloe's voice was frantic, breaking with panic. Doctor, Eleanor, where are you? Can you get back to the hospital immediately? The maternity patient in bed 3 is suffering severe postpartum hemorrhage. Her family is causing a massive scene. Dr. Harrison is in another operating theater, and you're the only one who knows this case best. Everything that had just happened was violently yanked behind me. I stopped dead. In my tracks under a massive oak tree, took a very deep breath, and quickly wiped the corners of my eyes with the back of my hand. Prepare extra blood. Call the blood bank to double-check the blood type. Tell the operating theater to stand by. I'm heading back right now. The taxi pulled up to the main entrance of St. Jude's. 12 minutes later, I practically sprinted through the lobby, my scrubs not even fully buttoned. Chloe handed me a surgical mask and the medical file right at the lift doors. Her eyes swept over my face, probably noticing how pale my lips were, but she didn't ask. Everyone working in the maternity ward understands that there are times when personal matters must be folded away behind an emergency call, because a human life on the operating table will not wait for you to find your peace of mind. Inside the emergency room, the young mother lay deathly pale. Her husband, outside, was screaming, asking why his wife was bleeding so much. The beep-beep of the monitor, the nurse reading out the blood pressure, the doctor calling for instruments all echoed relentlessly in my ears. I snapped on my gloves, quickly, assessing the situation, my voice automatically becoming as steady as every other time I stood on the borderline of life and death. Chloe, speed up the IV fluids. Get the family to sign the blood transfusion. Consent form. Prepare the uterine contraction medication. Monitor her pulse. Every 5 minutes. Everyone stay calm, we still have time. No one in that room knew that half an hour ago I had just been called a worthless, barren woman, nor did anyone need to know that on the emergency table, a mother was bleeding out, a newborn baby was crying hoarsely in the next room, and I was their doctor. The hands that had trembled holding that medical report earlier were now firmly pressing on the patient's abdomen, checking every reflex, every abnormal sign. I heard my own voice ringing out, clear and definitive, as if the human being inside me hadn't just been torn to shreds. Nearly 2 hours later, the bleeding was controlled and the mother was past the critical stage. The husband stood in the corridor, his eyes red, bowing deeply. In gratitude to the medical team, I took off my mask, sweat soaked my hairline, the back of my scrubs clinging to my skin. Chloe handed me a bottle of water, lowering her voice. Are you okay? You look terrible. I held the bottle but didn't drink immediately. My throat was parched, and Mrs. Harrington's words still echoed in my head. A woman who cannot bear children, no matter how successful, is just a barren tree. I had just saved a mother from the gates of death, yet in the eyes of the people who once called me family, my value lay solely in whether my womb could give them a grandchild. Thinking about it, I found it laughable, but I couldn't even muster a smile. Go rest for a bit, Chloe said, her voice softening. I'll cover the floor out. Here. My on-call room was at the end of the 3rd floor corridor. It was small, with just a desk, a metal filing cabinet, and a camp bed used for overly long night shifts. I pushed the door open, intending to sit down for a few minutes before washing my face, but as soon as I flipped the light switch, I froze. A man was standing by the window with his back to me. His shoulders were broad, his posture straight, his dark shirt rolled up to the elbows, and in his hand, he held the familiar blue NHS record book of a pediatric patient named Mia. I recognized him after a few seconds. Arthur, the father of little Mia, a 5-year-old patient with recurrent respiratory infections, whom I had been monitoring for over half a year. He had brought his daughter in for checkups. Few times, he spoke little, was always on time, and asked brief but very precise questions. I had heard colleagues mention that he was the deputy director of nursing and clinical operations for the St. Jude's Trust. He had previously served in the military medical corps, so his demeanor was so strict that people felt pressured just standing near him. Mr. Arthur, I spoke up, trying to hide my exhaustion. Is Mia coughing again? Why didn't you book an appointment at the outpatient clinic? The man turned around. His eyes rested on my face in silence for a few seconds, not scrutinizing, but not easy to evade either. He placed the medical book neatly on the desk and spoke in a deep, steady voice, so direct that I had no time to put my guard up. Dr. Eleanor, you were deeply hurt by those people, weren't you? Outsiders often think that doctors are used to blood, used to the sound of crying, used to the worst-case scenarios, so their hearts must be calloused. In reality, that's not true. We just learn to tuck our own pain into a temporary drawer, locking it quickly so we can open another drawer for our patients. But when someone unexpectedly calls that wound by its exact name, the drawer you thought was locked tight suddenly bursts open, leaving you so flustered you don't know where to look. I stepped into the room and closed the door, trying to maintain the professional distance between a doctor and a patient's relative. If you are here about Mia, we can discuss her files, but my personal affairs have nothing to do with you. Arthur didn't argue. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit, as if his standing posture alone was enough to make the small room feel even tighter. On the desk, the Tupperware lunch I had ordered that morning had gone cold, condensation, dripping down the plastic lid in tiny droplets. His gaze swept over the lunchbox, over my wrists, which still bore the red indentations of surgical gloves, and finally rested on the maternity file I had just placed on the desk. I didn't intend to eavesdrop on your business, Arthur said, his voice deep and clear, without any sycophantic beating around the bush. At noon, I was sitting at the table behind you, waiting for a hospital partner. The woman and her son were speaking so loudly the whole cafe heard. Later, I saw you run back here, straight into the emergency theater. Someone who was insulted to that degree, yet still saved a life without missing a beat. I thought I ought to say a few words to you. I gave a bitter smile, feelings of shame and anger rising again. If you're here to praise my resilience, there's no need. I am not so resilient that I enjoy having strangers witness my humiliation. Nobody likes to be seen when they are vulnerable. You remained frustratingly calm, but being vulnerable doesn't mean you are inferior. That sentence touched me in a very strange way. It wasn't soft comfort nor cheap pity. It was like a dry assessment, yet it placed me right back in my woe position as a human being after someone had just tried to drag me down into being nothing more than a defective womb. I turned away, opened my water bottle, and took a small sip. My throat was still bitter. Arthur pushed Mia's medical book towards me. Mia isn't getting worse. She's been sleeping much better since the last medication you prescribed. I came to say thank you, and whilst I'm here, I want to discuss something else. I'm listening, I said, though my mind was so exhausted I just wanted to collapse onto the camp bed behind the cabinet. He looked straight at me. I am a widower of 3 years. I have a 5-year-old daughter. My career is stable. My housing situation is clear, with no debts. I need a wife who has good character, a respectable profession, and enough patience to help me raise Mia. You are unmarried and you have just walked away from an unworthy relationship. If you agree, we can register our marriage. I thought I misheard. The last half day had been absurd enough, but this statement felt like a far more brutal plot twist than the medical report in the Closta cafe. I put my water bottle down on the desk, looking at him as one would look at a patient describing bizarre symptoms. Arthur, do you know what you are? Saying, I know we've only met a few times at the clinic. I am your daughter's doctor, not someone you can pick from a catalog to fill a vacancy in your house. I didn't pick you from a catalog, he said. I've observed long enough to know how you treat Mia. She is very difficult to approach, but you have never lost your patience. You remember what she is allergic to, how terrified she is of the nebulizer's noise. And the other day, when she spilt an entire cup of water on your scrubs, you just handed her a tissue to wipe it up herself and said it was fine. Those small things cannot be faked. I fell silent. Even I hadn't remembered those details. Yet he did. That didn't immediately move me. It only made me more guarded. This man was too direct, too pragmatic, to the point that his marriage proposal sounded like a performance review. No flowers, no ring, no romance, not even a simple I like you. Just requirements, conditions, responsibilities, and a child needing care. So you need a nanny with a marriage certificate? I asked, my voice turning cold. Arthur paused slightly. Perhaps for the first time in our conversation, he realized his phrasing was hurtful, but that awkwardness was fleeting. He quickly lowered his voice. No, I need someone to stand beside me in my home, not an employee. I am not good at saying pretty words, so my bluntness might upset you. But Eleanor Having children is not my condition. It's fine if you have difficulty conceiving. It's fine if you never have children. I already have Mia. And for a marriage to last, it must be built on decency, not just reproductive ability. In that moment, I couldn't respond right away. It was just a few sentences, yet they were heavier than any vow Damien had ever made to me. My boyfriend of 5 for years had used his silence to agree with his mother that I was a failed investment. Meanwhile, the man in front of me, practically a stranger, spoke of childbirth as casually as talking about the weather. Whether you have them or not, it does not diminish you. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my knees suddenly feeling weak. Do you know what you're proposing? Marriage isn't a shift you can just schedule. Nor am I someone who, having just been abandoned, instantly needs someone to shelter her, to prove she still has value. Arthur pulled out the chair opposite me. This time he sat down. The distance between us narrowed, but it didn't make me feel pressured. I don't want to prove anything on your behalf. You don't need to prove anything to that mother and son. I am simply offering an option you can refuse. And what do you get? I asked directly. A wife on paper, someone to help care for my daughter, a house that looks like a complete family, he answered without evasion. And you get a home where no one will ever use a medical report to humiliate you. A legal status protected by law. A husband who will not stand idle when others insult his wife. I won't. Promise to love you immediately, because that would be a lie. But I promise to respect you. Respect. Those 2 words dropped into the small room slowly, but very deeply. For years I had heard too many words of love. I love you. I adore you. Wait. Until I'm settled and will marry. My mother is difficult, but I will persuade her. Those words used to soften my heart, making me overlook all the times Damien left me alone to bear the pressure. But in the end, when I needed someone to stand beside me, he chose to stand behind his mother. Out in the corridor, the sound of a medicine trolley rolling over the linoleum, the voices of patients asking for directions, the tannoy calling a doctor on duty echoed steadily. Life in the hospital doesn't stop for anyone's personal drama. I looked at the cold lunchbox on the desk, suddenly feeling that I was just like it forgotten in the middle of an excessively long day, growing cold, without anyone noticing. Did you investigate me? I asked, a nameless anxiety still lingering in my worrying chest. He knew about Damien, about my medical condition, about the fact that I was unmarried. Those weren't things you could learn just from a few clinic visits. Arthur looked at me for a moment before answering. I heard that man's name in the cafe, and your illness was announced loudly by his mother in front of everyone. I did not access your medical records, and I never would. As for you, being unmarried, the hospital has basic HR information because you are the lead clinician on a project I oversee. If that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. His apology wasn't soft, but looking at his deceit, for someone whose privacy had just been violated by her own fiancé, that boundary was so crucial it almost decided whether I stood up and kicked him out of the room. Fortunately for him, and perhaps fortunately for me, Arthur hadn't crossed it. 3 days, he continued, placing a gray business card next to Mia's medical book. You don't need to answer right away. Within the next 3 days, if you agree, call me. If you don't call, I will understand it as a refusal. And what happened today will never be mentioned again. I picked up the business card. The text was simple. Arthur Harrison, Deputy, Director of Nursing and Clinical Operations, St. Jude's Trust, followed by his personal mobile number. No lengthy titles, no flashy logos. Just like the man. Himself, concise and weighty. Arthur stood up, picking up Mia's medical book, but didn't leave immediately. Before opening the door, he turned back to look at me, his voice lower. Eleanor, you are a brilliant doctor, but today, don't try to be someone who feels no pain. Go home, eat something, and sleep. The person who saves others also needs to be saved. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the on-call room suffocatingly quiet. I sat for a long time, still holding the business card in my hand, my eyes fixed on the cold lunch. Throughout that entire day, for the first time, I didn't cry over Mrs. Harrington's scolding, nor over Damien's cowardice. I just felt tired, a bone-deep exhaustion, like someone walking across a very long bridge, only to discover halfway that someone had dismantled the other end. For the next 3 days, I took annual leave. Chloe looked at me with worried eyes but didn't ask much. She just shoved a container of warm chicken soup into my hands and said, "Go home and sleep. If you need anything, call me. Don't carry it all alone." I nodded, but when I returned to my small flat near the hospital, the first thing I did wasn't to eat the soup, but to pack all of Damien's belongings into a cardboard box. His forgotten shirts, his razor, some business books, his chipped matching mug, even the slippers he wore whenever he stayed over, every item was placed into the class aid box, not forcefully, but decisively. I had rented this flat for 3 years. It was on the 5th floor of an old building with no lift. In the past, coming home from a night shift, the place used to feel warm because someone occasionally dropped by. Because there was a small dining table. Because there were 2 bowls drying next to each other. Now, looking back, the flat remained the same, but the things that once made it feel like a home had suddenly revealed themselves to belong to someone who could walk away at any moment. I carried the box down to the ground floor, placed it next to the bins, stared at it for a few seconds, and walked back up. No text message, no prior warning. He had paid me off with £20,000 and a weary "I'm tired," so I didn't need to be polite enough to return every memory by hand. The first night, I couldn't sleep. My phone lit up with numerous texts from friends. News of the breakup had probably spread from the cafe or from Damien's 23. Mother herself. Some cursed him as a coward. Some advised me to sue for his defamation. Some told me I was still young and would meet someone better. I knew they cared for me, but the more I read, the more tangled my heart became, so eventually, I placed the phone face down on my pillow. Arthur's business card lay on the table next to the medical report I had retrieved from my drawer. On one side was the thing that caused me to be discarded. On the other, a proposal to start over in the most unbelievable way. I thought a lot about Mia, the little girl who always shrank into the corner of the chair every time she came for a checkup, who coughed and then looked at her father as if to apologize. I also thought about Arthur, the man who said, marriage wasn't about finding fleeting emotions, but about choosing responsibility and decency. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, light rain began to patter against the tin roof of the adjacent building. The sound of water dripping onto the balcony was rhythmic. I made a mug of ginger tea, and after drinking half of it, the lump in my throat seemed to ease. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It was just that the pain had stopped screaming. It sat quietly in a corner, making room for another question. If the old path has been blocked by humiliation, do I dare take a new turn, not knowing where it leads? I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the business card. The other end answered almost instantly, so fast I thought he was waiting. Arthur's voice rang out deep and clear. "I'm listening." I looked around the small flat, looked at the chipped matching mug I had discarded in the bin downstairs, looked at the medical report on the table, and slowly said, "If your offer from that day still stands, I agree." Silence hung on the line for a few seconds. There was no sigh of relief. No, asking again just to be sure, no noisy celebration. Arthur simply replied, exactly as he was, "I've prepared the necessary documents. Tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m., bring your passport and certificate of no impediment to the Portingsburket. Islington Town Hall. I'll wait for you at the entrance." I let out a very soft chuckle. The first time in 3 days. "Do you always speak like you're giving a hospital handover?" Over the phone, Arthur seemed to pause. A moment later, his voice was lower, slightly unnatural. "I will try to work on that." It was a simple sentence, yet it made the hand holding my phone feel a little less cold. This marriage might not begin with love, but at least it began with someone willing to admit he needed to work on something. The next morning, I arrived at Islington Town Hall 10 minutes early. In my, quote, handbag were my passport, the certificate of no impediment, and a pale lipstick I hadn't worn in a long time. The sky after the rain was clearer, the pavement still slick with thin puddles of water. A few flower vendors near the town hall were setting up, chatting about whether there was an inspection today. I stood under the shade of a large tree, watching couples walk in to register their camples. Marriages. Some were laughing joyously, some girls held small bouquets, some young men clumsily fixed their soon-to-be wives' hair. As for me, preparing to marry after a proposal as cold as meeting minutes, I was so calm that I found myself strange. At exactly 9 a.m., a black car pulled up to the entrance. Arthur stepped out, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, holding a thin document folder. No blazer, no flowers, no family accompanying him. Seeing me, he nodded, his eyes briefly stopping at the cream-colored dress I wore, and said, "You're early. And you are unnecessarily punctual," I replied. The corners of his lips seemed to twitch. It was hard to tell if it was a smile. "I'm used to it." The registration procedure went faster than I had imagined. The registrar checked our documents and asked if we were marrying of our own free will. Both of us answered yes. When I put my pen to the register, looking at my name, sitting next to Arthur Harrison, my heart skipped a beat. After 5 years of loving Damien, I had thought the day I signed my marriage certificate would be so nerve-wracking it would bring me to tears, that my mother would call to give me advice, that my friends would tease me, that there would be a warm family dinner. But the reality was, I was sitting in a fluorescent-lit administrative room, signing my name next to a man I had only met a handful of times, whilst a heart felt as though it had just stepped through a door it could never return from. The registrar handed us the 2 marriage certificates, smiling and wishing us well. Arthur took them, carefully placing them into a sturdy folder, and handed 1 copy to me. Our fingers brushed very lightly, but I instinctively pulled my hand back. He noticed, said nothing, and just withdrew his hand. Out in the courtyard, the sound of traffic blaring from the street lessened the blank, heavy atmosphere. Arthur opened the car door for me, waited for me to get in, and then walked around to the driver's seat. After driving a short distance, he spoke. "From today, legally, you are my wife, but I will not force you to do anything you aren't ready for. Your own bedroom has been prepared." I turned to look at him. His words sounded like contract terms. Arthur looked straight ahead, his face serious. "I didn't mean it like that. I just want you to feel at ease." A clumsy response, but a genuine one. Perhaps with this man, tenderness didn't lie in polished words, but in the fact that he remembered to leave me an escape route, even as we had just become legal husband and wife. The car turned into the Street Jude's executive mews, located just behind the Sangha Hospital, passing through a security gate and a row of faux elm trees. I had heard colleagues mention this estate. It was housing for senior management, long-serving consultants, and key personnel of the hospital trust. It wasn't overly luxurious like a millionaire's mansion, but it was pristine, quiet, and possessed an air of strict order. The security guard, seeing Arthur's car, greeted him quickly, his eyes flicking to me just for a second before he looked down to log the entry. Arthur's flat was on the 7th floor of the inner building, much larger than my old rented room. The door opened to a living room so tidy it felt almost cold. A gray sofa, a glass coffee table, neatly arranged bookshelves, not a single redundant item. On the wall hung a few black and white landscape photos. Near the window was a dark green snake plant. Everything was spotlessly clean, and in its place, but it lacked the scent of a living family. It looked more like a high-end bachelor pad than a home with a child. A woman in her 50s walked out from the kitchen, a dishcloth still in her hand. Seeing Arthur bring me in, she paused slightly before immediately offering a warm smile. "You must be Eleanor. I'm Mrs. Higgins. I've been helping Mr. Crute. Arthur look after Mia for the last few years. He mentioned you'd be arriving this morning." The formal way she addressed me made me feel awkward. I quickly stepped forward to help take a bag from her hand. "Please, just call me Eleanor. I've only just arrived. I hope you can show me the ropes." Mrs. Higgins looked at me more closely, her eyes softening. "This house hasn't had the sound of a woman in a long time. With you here, little Mia might not be so lonely. But the poor girl is very shy. Please don't take it to heart if she avoids you at first." Just as she finished speaking, a very faint sound came from the bedroom. A corridor. I turned to see a little girl wearing a pale yellow dress standing tucked behind the door frame, her 2 hands tightly clutching a frayed, stuffed bunny. Mia was smaller than I remembered from the clinic. Perhaps because at the hospital, she was always carried by Arthur or sat in his lap. Now, her whole body seemed engulfed by the light spilling from the bedroom. Her big, dark eyes looked at me, equal parts curious and defensive. I crouched down to be at her eye level, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Mia, you remember Dr. Eleanor?" I listened to your chest once and gave you a cat sticker when you finally took your medicine. Mia pressed her lips together and didn't answer. Her small hands gripped the plode, Bunny's ears tighter. Then she took half a step backward into the room. The door closed very slowly, making no loud sound, but it still made my heart sink. I knew beforehand that this child wouldn't easily accept me, but knowing it didn't mean it didn't sting. Arthur stood beside me, his voice low. She doesn't hate you, she's just afraid. Of strangers. I understand. I stood up. A child who lost her mother early has the right to be afraid. The atmosphere in the living room grew quiet. Mrs. Higgins quickly changed the subject, offering to show me my room. My room was next to Mia's. The window looked down onto the inner courtyard. The bedsheets were pale blue, half the place. Wardrobe was empty, and on the desk sat a carafe of warm water and a small vase of daisies. I knew for sure these things weren't Arthur's idea. It was likely Mrs. Higgins's doing, but that neat thoughtfulness still soothed my heart. After 20 enders ever sev. Days of being shoved from the cafe to the emergency room, from the old flat to a marriage certificate, I finally had a place to put my bag down without hearing someone ask if I could give birth. That afternoon, I went back to my flat to get my things. Arthur offered to call movers, but I declined. The things belonging to my past life weren't many. 2 suitcases of clothes, some medical textbooks, a lockbox for my documents, and the stethoscope that had been with me since I was a junior doctor. Before locking the door, I stood in the middle of the empty room for a few minutes. This place used to hold my laughter, my tears, the times I waited for Damien to return, the hasty noodles eaten after night shifts. But as the door closed, I didn't feel the pain I expected. Perhaps when a place has witnessed someone being abandoned, leaving is just a way of saving oneself. That evening, the first dinner in Arthur's house had 4 people, but it was as silent as a meal shared among strangers newly moved into a shared house. Mrs. Higgins had cooked shepherd's pie, roasted carrots, and peas. I noticed Mia only ate the mashed potatoes with a tiny bit of gravy, not touching the meat. According to her medical file, she often coughed at night, had a weak stomach, and felt nauseous if she ate food that was too rich. I didn't point it out in front of everyone. I just scooped a small piece of roasted carrot onto my plate and said casually, "The carrots are so soft, sweeter than I thought." Mia glanced at my plate. She still didn't speak, but her fork lightly nudged a piece of carrot on her own plate. I pretended not to see, looking down and continuing to eat. With children, sometimes the best care isn't staring at them, waiting for them to accept it, but giving them the feeling they have the right to choose. Arthur, sitting opposite, ate very slowly. Sometimes he looked at me and Mia, his eyes unreadable, but he didn't intervene. I was secretly grateful he wasn't impatiently telling his daughter to call me Mum, nor offering cliché phrases like, "Eleanor is very nice, you must be a good girl." The more adults push, the more children recoil. Mia had lost her mother. She didn't need another stranger. Branded as Mum by her father on the very first day. After dinner, Mrs. Higgins took Mia to have a bath. Arthur called me into the living room and placed a brown folder on the coffee table. "These are the household documents," he said. "Information on the joint accounts, mine and Mia's insurance policies, the property deeds, the nursery phone number, and her pediatrician's details. I have added your name as an emergency contact for Mia. If you feel it's inappropriate, I can remove it." I opened the folder, my heart growing heavier with every page. Everything was meticulously organized into categories, from savings accounts to life insurance, from Mia's birth certificate to her vaccination record. At the very back was a handwritten note, the handwriting firm, and even, "You have full authority over household expenses. The main debit card is in the envelope. If you need any extra funds for personal or professional use, just let me know." "Aren't you afraid I'll take the money and run?" I asked, half joking. Arthur looked at me calmly. "If I have chosen you as my wife and still have to guard my wallet, this marriage shouldn't have begun." A dry but heavy sentence. I lowered my eyes to the folder to hide the wavering in my heart. Damien had loved me for 5 years, but had never let me know exactly how much he earned, how much he saved, or what his future plans were. Every time I brought up marriage, he would say we needed to wait because his prudent mother hadn't agreed, because his job wasn't stable, because buying a house was still a distant dream. Meanwhile, Arthur, the man who had only become my husband, that morning laid out his entire family's foundation right in front of me. No embellishments, no secrets. You didn't have to go this far, I said quietly. I agreed to marry you, not for the money. I know, he replied, but I want you to understand, you are not here as a lodger. From today, you own a part of this house. Out in the hallway, the sound of Mia coughing softly echoed. I almost stood up, out of professional habit, but stopped because I remembered I wasn't yet someone she trusted. Arthur heard it too. He turned his head toward his daughter's room, his eyes narrowing slightly. In that in that moment, the strict demeanor of the man sitting opposite me dissolved, revealing the very real helplessness of a father who had tried for years but still didn't know how to fill the void a mother left for her child. Does she cough like this every night? I asked. Yes, especially when the weather is damp. The medication you prescribed helped, but she still doesn't sleep deeply. Tomorrow, I'll review her diet and sleep schedule. We won't change anything. Abruptly, just adjust it gradually. Arthur looked at me longer than usual. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Your daughter doesn't seem easily bribed by roasted brom carrots. This time Arthur actually smiled. It was a very faint smile, just a flicker at the corners of his mouth, but enough to make the living room feel a little less cold. I suddenly realized he wasn't devoid of emotion. He had just grown used to hiding it too well. Just like this flat, everything was neat and clean, but missing the warmth of human presence. On my first night in the new house, I lay on the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sound of the lift out in the corridor, the sound of Mrs. Higgins cleaning the kitchen, the sound of Arthur talking on the phone very quietly out on the pull-in balcony. No one bothered me, no one demanded I instantly become a devoted wife and loving mother. That quietness should have brought me relief, but when the lights went out, the darkness dragged back Mrs. Harrington's midday insults, Damien's evasive gaze, and the medical report lying isolated in the middle of the cafe table. Near midnight, just as I was drifting off, a very soft, choked sob echoed through the adjoining wall. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then a hiccup followed, suppressed like someone crying but terrified of disturbing others. I sat up, pulled on a thin cardigan, and opened my door. The hallway was dim. The moon-shaped nightlight outside Mia's room was still on. Her door was slightly ajar. I stood outside for a few seconds, not wanting to intrude, but the crying inside made my chest tighten. Finally, I knocked softly. Mia, can Dr. Eleanor come in? There was no answer, just the sound of sniffling and the rustle of a duvet being pulled tighter. I pushed the door open very slowly. In the pale pink room, Mia sat huddled on the bed, her two hands clutching the stuffed bunny, and in front of her was a small picture frame. The woman in the photo was very young, with a gentle face and smiling eyes exactly like Mia's. I didn't need to ask to know it. Was her birth mother. Seeing me, Mia immediately flipped the frame face down, her red eyes wide with panic. I'm sorry, the little girl said, so softly it was almost a whisper. I won't be loud anymore. That apology stopped me dead in my tracks. A 5-year-old child crying because she missed her mother, and her first reaction was to apologize for fear of bothering the adults. I walked over but didn't sit too close, just pulling out the small chair near her desk, keeping enough distance so she wouldn't be scared. You don't need to apologize for missing your mummy, I said, my voice slow and soft. Missing your mummy is never a mistake. Mia looked at me, her lips trembling. Will you make me call you mummy? I shook my head. No. Whenever you want to, you can call me whatever you like. Dr. Eleanor is fine. But Daddy married you, the little girl said, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mrs. Higgins said we have a new person in the house. If there's a new person, the old mummy gets put away. My heart ached. It turned out that in Mia's small world, love was like a cramped cupboard. If someone new comes in, the old person has to be thrown out. I looked at the picture frame lying face down on the duvet and asked gently, Can I see? The picture of your mummy? Mia hesitated for a very long time before turning the frame over. The woman in frame, the photo was hugging Mia when she was even smaller. They were standing under a trellis of bougainvillea. I looked at it for a moment, then whispered, Your mummy is so beautiful. You have her eyes. Mia's face suddenly softened, as if that simple acknowledgement had helped her preserve her most precious treasure. I didn't touch the photo, nor did I touch Mia. I just sat there with her in the warm yellow glow of the nightlight. Outside the door, a shadow seemed to linger for a long time, but I didn't turn around. Perhaps it was Arthur. Perhaps he too was hearing for the first time the fear his daughter had kept hidden. Mia hugged her bunny, her voice so small that if I hadn't been listening closely, I would have missed it. I don't want a new mummy. I nodded, my throat tight, but managed to keep my voice steady. I know. I'm not. I'm here to take your mummy's place. I'm just here. If you cough, I'll get you some water. If you're hungry, I'll cook something soft. If you're sad, I'll sit and listen. Your mummy is still your mummy. No one is putting her away. The child looked at me for a very long time. She didn't run over and hug me. She didn't call me mum. There was no overnight miracle. But the small hands gripping, the bunny's ears gradually relaxed. As I stood up to leave, Mia suddenly asked softly, "Dr. Eleanor, will you still be here tomorrow?" I turned back to look at the little girl swallowed by the pink duvet, feeling both pity and heartbreak. "Yes," I replied. "Tomorrow I'll still be here." Walking out of Mia's room, I saw Arthur standing at the end of the hallway, his shadow cast long under the yellow light. He didn't ask what I had said, nor did he step inside to make his daughter feel awkward. Only when I walked closer did he speak, his voice hoarse. "Thank you, Elle." For the first time, he didn't call me Eleanor. I looked at him, then at Mia's half-closed door behind me. This house was still strange, this marriage still devoid of love, and inside each of us there was an unhealed wound. But that night, as Mia's crying faded behind her door, I suddenly understood that I hadn't just stepped into an agreement. I had stepped into a home with a child, terrified of losing a mother for a second time, and a man standing in the portnote corridor, so helpless he didn't know how to knock on his own daughter's heart. From that night on, I no longer saw Mia as an unapproachable child. I saw her as a tiny wound trying to teach itself not to cry in front of adults. On the first morning after I had entered her room, Mia still didn't call me Mum, nor did she run and hug me like in the fairy tales about the wicked stepmother turning into a kind one for a pitiful child. She just stood at the kitchen door, hugging her frayed bunny, watching me wash rice in a colander, and asked very quietly, "Are you still here today, Dr. Eleanor?" A question so simple that Mrs. Higgins, upon hearing it, turned away to quickly wipe her eyes. As for me, I had to bend down and open a cupboard to hide the lump in my throat. I turned my head, trying to speak normally. "I'm still here. Today I'm making warm oat porridge with a little bit of honey for you, but I won't force you to finish the bowl. Eat whatever you can." Mia nodded and said nothing more. But when I placed the small bowl on the table, she didn't push it away like the night before. Her spoon tapped lightly against the ceramic bowl. It was a very small sound, yet in Arthur's excessively tidy kitchen, it sounded like a door creaking open. Working as an OB/GYN, I was used to reading the smallest signs of the body and emotions. An infertile woman doesn't just hurt because of test results, but also because of her family's judgmental eyes. A postpartum mother isn't just exhausted from blood loss. She can collapse over a thoughtless comment from her husband. The same went for Mia. Her recurrent cough didn't just stem from weak lungs or damp English weather, but from a life lacking a steady rhythm and a sense of security. Her meals were erratic, her sleep shallow, she startled easily at night. And during the day, she tried too hard to be good. A 5-year-old who knows how to apologize just for crying isn't just good. She has been scared for far too long. I didn't change everything all at once. In the mornings, I still let Mrs. Higgins prepare her milk as usual, only adding a slice of soft toast and some scrambled eggs. For lunch, I reduced the fried foods and increased vegetable soups. In the evening before bed, I made Mia a cup of warm water and gently rubbed her back through her pajamas when she coughed. But I didn't force her to lie next to me. On the fridge door, I stuck a small note outlining her meal times, medication times, nebulizer schedule, and her favorite foods. Mrs. Higgins looked at the note and smiled warmly. In this house, everything has always run on Mr. Arthur's strict timetable. But this is the adult's timetable. Since you arrived, it finally feels like a home with a child. Arthur heard that comment when he returned from work. He stood at the kitchen door, briefcase still in hand, his eyes resting on the fridge note for a long time. I thought he might say I was a nuisance for intruding into his house, into every cupboard, every meal, every habit. But that man simply rolled up his sleeves, walked over to the sink, and asked with the serious expression of someone entering a board meeting, "What do I need to do tonight?" Mrs. Higgins chuckled, and I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Do you know how to prep vegetables?" Arthur looked at the bunch of broccoli on the counter as if it were a strange medical device. "I can learn. Just take off the tough stems and leave the florets. Don't strip it bare until only the stalks are left like last time Mrs. Higgins told me about." Mrs. Higgins laughed out loud. Mia, sitting at the dining table, also looked up. Arthur froze, a rare crack appearing in his serious demeanor. He bent his head and prepped the vegetables, his movements stiff, placing every floret to the prettiest, side in perfectly straight, regimented lines. The kitchen was suddenly filled with the sound of running water, the chop of a knife on a board, Mrs. Higgins whispering, "Mr. Arthur, the broccoli doesn't need to stand in military formation," and Mia laughing very softly behind her bunny. That laugh was thin, but it was enough to warm my heart for the rest of the evening. The following days passed with small acts like that. Mia still hadn't called me Mom, but she started standing closer when I cooked. She secretly watched me, carve carrots into the shape of flowers, and pretended not to care when I placed that flower into her bowl. One day, while I was reading medical journals at the Paina table, she hugged her drawing pad, sat 2 chairs away from me, and focused on coloring a house with a red roof. In front of the door were 3 stick figures, without faces. I didn't ask who they were. I just placed a cup of warm water next to her and said, "The tree in front of Mia's house is so beautiful." She didn't answer, but when I walked past again, I saw she had added a small flower pot next to the door. Arthur changed even slower than Mia, but he did change. Previously, he would come home after 8 p.m., eat dinner alone, ask Mrs. Higgins a few questions about his daughter, and then retreat to his study. Now, if there was no urgent meeting, he was home by 6:30 p.m. Sometimes he even brought back bags of fruit, or children's toys that the shop assistant had clearly oversold him on. One evening, he brought home 3 tubs of yogurt with a cat face on the lid. Mia's eyes lit up when she saw them, but I checked the expiration date and asked, "Who told you to buy this?" Arthur placed the bag on the table and answered matter-of-factly, "The supermarket staff said children like the cat pictures." "But Mia is coughing. She can't eat cold things tonight," I reminded him. He stayed silent for a few seconds, looking like someone who had just signed the wrong critical document. Mia looked at her dad, then at me, and finally clutched her stomach, giggling. Mrs. Higgins, standing in the kitchen, smiled too. Arthur put on a serious face, placing the yogurt in the fridge as if storing away a failed lesson. Then he turned to me, his voice very quiet. "Tomorrow, can we let it reach room temperature and let her have it?" A man who could make an entire hospital boardroom fall silent the moment he walked in was now asking me how to feed a child yogurt. That clumsiness, strangely, didn't diminish him in my eyes. It made him more approachable, like a normal husband, a normal father, relearning the things that a lost 3 years ago had forced him to abandon. The turning point with Mia happened on a weekend morning. The sun was shining, gently, and I brought some small potted plants bought from the garden center onto the balcony. Mint, lemon balm, thyme, and a miniature climbing rose. Mia sat on the living room rug, hugging her bunny, watching me struggle with the soil. She didn't come close, but her eyes followed my every move. I knew she was curious, so I worked while talking as if to myself. "This mint can be boiled with honey when you have a cough, but you shouldn't eat it straight. As for this rose, it's pretty, but the thorns are quite fierce. Touch them and it hurts." Before I even finished speaking, my finger slipped off a rose branch. A small thorn pierced the tip of my index finger, and bright red blood immediately welled up into a round droplet. The wound was nothing, lighter than the times I'd been pricked by needles on a shift, but Mia suddenly screamed. That scream was so sharp and panicked that Mrs. Higgins ran out of the kitchen, and Arthur threw open his study door violently. Mia lunged toward me, dropping her bunny on the floor. She grabbed my wrist, her eyes wide, tears spilling out. So fast I couldn't understand what was happening. "Blood!" Dr. Eleanor is bleeding. Does it hurt? Do you have to go to the hospital? Are you, are you going to leave me? The last sentence fell out of her mouth. The entire balcony fell silent. I looked at the pale little face in front of me and suddenly understood. All the times she avoided me weren't because she hated me, nor because she was stubborn. In Mia's memory, her birth mother had fallen, ill, bled, gone to the hospital, and never come back. For her, loving a new woman in the house meant one day having to watch that person disappear. I sat right down on the balcony floor, ignoring the soil on my dress, slowly, extending my uninjured hand to give her time to refuse. Then I pulled Mia into my arms. At first, the child's body was stiff, but then she burst into tears, her hands clutching my shirt like someone falling off a cliff. I patted her back, gently, my own voice choking up. Mia, look at this. It's just a tiny scratch. I'll wash it and put a plaster on, and it will be fine. I'm a doctor. I know how to look after myself. I'm going to leave you because of a thorn. Mia sobbed uncontrollably. Mummy said she would come back too, but she didn't. My heart clenched. Arthur stood a few steps away, his face turning pale, his hands hanging limply at his sides, heartbreakingly helpless. Perhaps over the years he had cared for his child with all the best resources he had. The best medicine, the best school, a clean house, a dedicated nanny. But he didn't know where to touch this specific fear in her, because he, too, was a person left behind in that loss. I hugged Mia tighter, not lying to her with grandiose guarantees. Your mummy didn't want to leave you. There are things adults can't win against, even if they really want to. But I am here. I am here today, and I will be here tomorrow. If I ever have to go to the hospital to work, I will tell you first, and I will come back. You don't need to pretend you don't care about me just so. You won't be scared. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to cry. Mia buried her face in my shoulder, crying until my shirt was soaked. Mrs. Higgins wiped away her tears, quietly picking up the bunny and placing it next to us. Arthur remained still, his eyes red, but he didn't step forward to pull his daughter away. Perhaps he understood this was a moment Mia had to choose for herself. A long while later, the crying subsided. The little girl looked up at the dried lichens, blood on my fingertip, and mumbled, "Can I put a plaster on you?" "Of course," I answered, trying to smile, "but the doctor needs to wash it first." That afternoon, Mia personally applied a yellow bear plaster to my finger, placing it completely crooked. She sat next to me on the sofa, occasionally checking to make sure it hadn't peeled off. By the evening, when Arthur walked past the living room, Mia suddenly called out, "Daddy, Dr. Eleanor's hand hurts, so you have to do the washing up tonight." Arthur looked at his daughter, then at me. In his eyes, there was a very strange light, both sad and relieved. He nodded seriously. "All right, Daddy will do the washing up." Standing behind him, Mrs. Higgins whispered, "At this rate, our plates will be lined up in military formation too." Mia burst out laughing, and I laughed too. Arthur pretended not to hear. The house that used to be as cold as a hotel room suddenly had laughter seeping into every corner, not loud, but enough to make you want to come home. From that day on, Mia began to cling to me in a very cautious way. She still called me Dr. Eleanor, but every night she would bring her pillow over to my room with a different excuse. Sometimes there was a mosquito in her room. Sometimes the bunny wanted me to read a story. Sometimes she said Daddy snored too loudly, even though his room was on the other side of the flat. I never exposed those clumsy excuses. I just cleared a small space on the bed, tucked her in, and told her very ordinary stories. The story of a mint plant afraid of winter. The story of a lost cat finding its way home. The story of a child who didn't have to be good all the time to be loved. One night, when Mia had fallen asleep, Arthur knocked lightly on my door. He stood outside, holding a glass of warm milk, looking a bit out of place. "Is she asleep?" "Yeah, she's asleep. She didn't cough much today," I answered, taking the glass of milk from his hand. Arthur's eyes drifted to Mia, curled up under the duvet, a trace of peace lingering on the corners of her mouth after a long day. He looked for a long time, then whispered, "In 3 years, that's the first time I've seen her sleep like that." I didn't know how to respond. Some thank yous make the moment feel too formal if spoken aloud, so I just took a sip of milk. It was warm and slightly sweet. He had probably asked Mrs. Higgins to make it, because if he had done it himself, it would have been exact to the milliliter. But as my fingers touched the glass, that warmth seeped into my palms and lingered. Arthur stood still for a few seconds before saying, "You should sleep early too. Don't look after others so much you forget yourself." This was the second time he had dropped the formalities. It wasn't a slip of the Braysons, tongue like the other night, nor did he rush to correct himself. That familiarity fell between us very lightly, yet it flustered me more than his blunt marriage proposal. I looked down at the glass of milk and replied softly, "You too. Stop standing outside doors like a security guard." A very faint smile appeared on Arthur's face. "I will try to work on that." That was the phrase he had used on the phone before our wedding day. Hearing it again made my heart soften. Some marriages begin with brilliant declarations of love, only to fade into indifference. Ours began with conditions, with responsibility, with two wounded people standing next to each other, slowly, learning how to make room for the other in their lives. But peace never stayed with me for long. The following evening, while Mia was sitting on the rug coloring and I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of warm slash-in chicken soup, the phone on the table buzzed relentlessly. The screen lit up. Amidst the bubbling of the soup, displaying a name I had erased from my heart, but hadn't yet deleted from my contacts. Damien. My hand froze on the ladle and a familiar cold feeling slithered up my chest. I wiped my hands, picked up the phone, and stepped out onto the balcony so Mia wouldn't hear. The other end breathed heavily before Damien's voice rang out, hoarse and frantic. "Elle, it's me. I heard you got married. Tell me, you did this just to get back at me, didn't you?" His voice through the phone sounded impatient and annoyed, like a man whose possession had been stolen, rather than a man who had lost his lover through his own cowardice. The night wind on the balcony blew cold against my face. Inside, Mia was humming along to a nursery rhyme on the TV, and Arthur was probably still in his study. Two worlds separated by just a glass door, one holding the Proscos and R1. Warmth I had fought so hard to find, the other a past trying to claw at an old wound. I looked down at the estate courtyard, where yellow streetlights cast long shadows on the brick paths. "Damien, whether I get married or not has nothing to do with you." We broke up. The other end paused for a beat before he let out a short, bitter, forced laugh. "We broke up a few days ago and you've already signed a marriage certificate. Do you expect me to believe that? Elle, you're not that kind of person. Did that bastard force you, or did you purposely pick someone richer than me just to spite my mother and me?" The word bastard made me frown. In the past, Damien could be weak. He could be a mummy's boy. But he had never spoken so crudely in front of me. Perhaps when a man realizes he is no longer the center of a woman's world, his former politeness peels away very quickly. I lowered my voice. "He is my husband. You should watch your tone." "Husband," Damien repeated, his breathing heavier. "How long have you even known that him to call him a husband? A widower with a stepchild who's your boss at the hospital? What kind of good person is that? Don't be naive, Elle. Maybe he just needs a free nanny, or worse, a title to hide something from the world." I suddenly found it laughable. The day his mother humiliated me, Damien sat right beside her, so quiet that the chair beneath him seemed to have more shame than he did. Now that I had walked out of his life, he donned the guise of a rational savior trying to rescue me from a mistake. That belated concern didn't move me, it only exhausted me. "Are you done?" I asked. Damien froze. "Elle, I know I was wrong that day. My mum has a temper, and I was under pressure too. But our 5 years together wasn't fake. Come back to me. I'll take you to a better private clinic for proper treatment," the doctor said. "There's still a chance, right? I won't let my mother talk to you like that." Again, a wave of bitterness swept over my heart. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind me how desperately I used to wait for those exact words, if, on that day. In the cafe, Damien had stood up, held my hand, and told his mother that illnesses can be treated, that marriage isn't just for breeding. I might have cried in his arms. But that sentence came too late. After the breakup, after the £20,000 envelope, after I had become someone else's wife, some apologies arrive. So late they are no longer medicine, but just salt rubbed onto a scab. I don't need it anymore, I said, every word crystal clear. I'm not coming. Back. Don't call me again. Don't be stubborn, Damien almost snapped. How long is a man with a stepchild? Going to treat you well? Does that kid even call you mum? Or does their whole family just see you as a replacement? Elle, listen to me. At least we had 5 years. What does he have besides a piece of paper? The glass door behind me suddenly reflected Arthur's shadow in the living room. He stood a few steps away, not coming out. He had probably just come to get water and accidentally overheard a few words. Mia was still sitting on the rug, oblivious to the adult drama, focused on coloring a purple cat. That image made me strangely calm. Damien asked what Arthur had besides a marriage certificate. But he didn't know that this man had handed over his entire family's assets for me to hold, had stood outside his daughter's door learning to trust me, had bought the wrong yogurt just to make Mia happy, and had called me Elle in a voice so endearingly. Clumsy, I couldn't bear to laugh. He has respect, I replied. The one thing you didn't have when I needed it most. Damien fell dead silent. I didn't wait for him to say another word. I hung up and immediately muted the notifications. But as I turned to go back inside, my stomach suddenly churned violently. A smell wafted from the kitchen, probably the chicken soup boiling over. Normally it smelled delicious, but right then it made my throat constrict. I quickly covered my mouth, ran straight to the downstairs bathroom, dropped to my knees by the toilet, and dry heaved until tears streamed down my face. Arthur appeared behind me almost instantly. He didn't bombard me with questions. He simply handed me a glass of warm water and placed a box of tissues by my hand. What's wrong? I rinsed my mouth and tried to stand up, but my head spun slightly. It's nothing. I've been eating irregularly the last few days, just an upset stomach. Arthur's gaze lingered on my face longer than usual. In his eyes was a very sharp observation, not suspicion, but the attentiveness of someone used to reading minor signs. You've been tired since last week, eating less in the morning, feeling sleepy in the afternoons, and now throwing up tonight. Do we need to go to A and E? Hearing him list the symptoms, I froze. I had actually noticed those signs, but had deliberately ignored them. I'd been tired lately, easily sleepy, and the smell of cooking oil occasionally made me nauseous. My period was late, but my cycle had always been irregular due to PCOS, so I brushed it off just like countless times before. As an OB/GYN, I understood my body better than anyone. But precisely because I understood it so well, I didn't dare entertain the possibility, the very thing that a woman humiliated for her fertility issues simultaneously longs for and dreads. There's no need, I replied a bit too quickly, avoiding his eyes. I just need to rest for a bit. Arthur didn't push. He just looked at me for a few more seconds and said, If you still feel unwell, let me know. I nodded. But that night, after Mia had gone to sleep and the house quieted down, that question began to circle in my head like a bird desperately flapping its wings. A missed period, sleepiness, nausea, sensitive to smells. If these symptoms belonged to my patient, I would immediately advise a pregnancy test or a blood draw. But when they belonged to me, my hands and feet turned to ice. In a pocket of my suitcase, there were a few pregnancy test kits. The cheap ones I often bought in bulk to show patients in the clinic, some of which I occasionally shoved into my bag. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, my palms sweating. In the next room, Mia breathed evenly in her sleep. Out on the balcony, Arthur was on the phone, with someone, his voice very low. The house was so peaceful I feared a single-priced result could shatter it all. I took the test kit into the bathroom and locked the door. The few minutes of calm waiting felt longer than any emergency surgery I had ever performed. When the 7/AT1 first line appeared, I kept telling myself to stay calm. But when the second line darkened so clear there was no mistaking it, all the ambient noise seemed to be sucked out of the room. I stood leaning against the sink, staring at the two red lines on the stick, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I was pregnant. The body that people had used as an excuse to discard me, the womb that Damien's mother had judged as barren land, was telling me that a spark of life had arrived. Not on a patient's chart, not through my congratulations to Another couple, but inside me. I didn't know when the tears started falling. I didn't cry out loud. I just stood there, one hand on my stomach, the other holding the stick as if holding something both sacred and terrifying. Joy hadn't even had time to bloom before fear crushed it. This child was Arthur's. There was nothing scandalous about that since we were Arthur's, husband and wife. But our marriage started as an agreement, with the premise of companionship, with him explicitly saying that having children didn't matter. If I was pregnant now, would he be happy or would he feel things were moving too fast? Would he think I was using a child to trap him? Would Mia fear that I wouldn't love her anymore once I had my own biological child? Those questions collided with each other, suffocating me. I quickly wrapped the test in tissue paper, intending to hide it in my pocket, before going out to wash my face. But when I opened the door, Arthur was already standing in the hallway, holding a thin cardigan. His eyes stopped on my pale face, then dropped to the hand tightly clenched inside my pocket. "You're crying," he said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head instinctively. "No. I just feel unwell from throwing up." Arthur stepped closer, gently placing a hand on my forehead. His palm was dry and warm, while I was so cold I could feel it myself. "You don't have a fever, but you're shaking. Are you all right, Al?" He called my name, his voice lowering. "How late is your period?" That question stopped me dead. Every defense in my mind was pierced by that single sentence. I looked up at him, astonished and panicked. Arthur wasn't a gynecologist, but he was far too observant. Perhaps over the past few days, he had noticed every unfinished meal, every time I grimaced at the smell of oil, every afternoon I fell asleep on the chair whilst reading to Mia. I stammered, my throat tight. The test stick in my pocket felt like it was burning. Arthur looked at me for a few seconds and didn't ask further. He turned into his room, grabbed his car keys, and came back out with his coat. "We're going to the hospital." "There's no need," I said hastily. "It's late. I can go by myself tomorrow." "No." His voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. "If it is what I think it is, you certainly shouldn't be sitting here terrified on your own. We are going right now." That phrase, "terrified on your own," broke my last line of defense. I was used to handling everything by myself, from difficult medical cases to my breakup, from throwing out Damien's things to moving out of my old flat. But that night, when Arthur draped his coat over my shoulders and awkwardly buttoned it for me, I suddenly realized I was exhausted from having to be strong for so long. The drive to St. Jude's Hospital late at night was quieter than usual. Arthur drove very slowly, occasionally glancing at me without saying a word. I sat in the passenger seat, both hands on my stomach, my mind so chaotic I didn't even know what to pray for. If it was negative, would I be relieved or disappointed? If it was positive, would that joy be welcomed? Outside the window, the London street lights stretched into long streaks like golden threads connecting a day, humiliating past to a future I dared not name. The A&E department wasn't crowded, but the smell of antiseptic was painfully familiar. Arthur had called ahead to Dr. Harper, a senior OB, GYN, and someone who frequently handled high-risk pregnancies. Seeing me, she looked slightly surprised but quickly shifted to her professional demeanor. I didn't need to explain much. I just handed her the test stick and whispered, "My period is late. The test is showing 2 lines. Please check for me." Dr. Harper looked at me, then at Arthur, who was standing beside me with a face so tense it looked as if he were waiting for surgery results. She didn't tease us, she just nodded. "We'll do a blood test first, then an ultrasound. Stay calm, you two. Have a seat and wait. You two." That phrasing made my ears burn. Arthur helped me sit down, and then stood beside me, his hands clasped together. This man was usually so calm he was unreadable, yet right now, his knuckles were white. Seeing that, the fear in my heart subsided just a fraction. At least he wasn't indifferent. The wait for the results didn't take too long, but to me it felt like an entire night. When Dr. Harper stepped out holding the lab report, her eyes were crinkling with a smile. "Congratulations, you're definitely pregnant. The hormone levels are quite strong, but to be absolutely sure of the location and The number of gestational sacs. We should do an ultrasound right now. Arthur stood bolt upright. Is something wrong, doctor? Dr. Harper pointed to the monitor. One gestational sac here, a second sac here, and a third sac right here. Eleanor, you are carrying triplets. Everything seemed to stop. I stared at the screen, looking at the 3 tiny dots in the blurry bright areas. My mind went completely blank. One baby would have been enough to make me dizzy. But inside me, there wasn't just one, but 3 sparks of life. The number 3 echoed in my chest, both miraculous and terrifying, like an overwhelmingly massive answer to the people who had viewed my body as hopeless. Arthur said nothing. He stood by the bed, his eyes glued to the ultrasound monitor, his face frozen in shock. A moment later, he brought a hand to his mouth, then lowered it, his fingers trembling very slightly. I had never seen him like this. The man who could handle hospital crises with an unchanging expression, who could discuss marriage like reading a business plan, was now completely undone by 3 tiny dots on a screen. Natural triplets are quite rare, Dr. Harper said, her tone turning cautious. This is wonderful news, but it is also a high-risk pregnancy. Eleanor has a history of endocrine disorders, and with a multiple pregnancy, she needs strict monitoring from now on. Plenty of rest, proper nutrition, and limited stress. Arthur, as her husband, you need to keep a close eye on her. Don't let her overwork. Arthur immediately nodded, his voice hoarse. I understand. Please write down everything I need to do. I turned to look at him. Are you happy? The question slipped out very quietly, almost a confession of my fear. Arthur looked down, his eyes leaving the screen to look directly at me. In those eyes, there was joy, there was anxiety, and there was a vulnerability he had, always buried deep. He reached out and gently touched my forehead, his voice so deep it trembled. I am happy, but I am more terrified of the danger to you. Just that one sentence was enough to make my tears spill over. He didn't ask if they were boys or girls. He didn't boast about family blessings. He didn't mention carrying on the family line. The very first thing he thought of was whether I was in danger. I was once discarded because people feared I couldn't bear a child. And now, when I was truly pregnant, the man beside me was terrified of my pain, terrified for my safety, terrified I would have to bear too much. Leaving the ultrasound room, Arthur held the 3 small printouts as if they were the most important documents of his life. He walked very slowly, one hand supporting my back, even though I could walk perfectly fine. Reaching the lift doors, he suddenly stopped, looking down at my stomach still flat beneath my loose coat, with an expression as serious as if he were addressing 3 understanding children. From today, all 4 of you must listen to the doctor. I cried and laughed at the same time. Are you giving orders to 3 tiny dots? Arthur looked at me, and for the first time that night he gave a clear smile, exhausted but radiant. I'm giving orders to myself first. I have to relearn everything. The lift doors opened, and the bright white light spilled into the hospital corridor. I walked in with Arthur, my hand still held tightly in his. In his her hand were the 3 thin ultrasound photos. But from the moment we left clinic, he had held them more carefully than any confidential hospital file. 3 tiny dots in 3 black and white frames, so blurry that an outsider probably wouldn't see anything significant. Yet to me, they were like 3 very soft knocks on the door of my life. Just over a fortnight ago, I was standing under the sun after being paid off, with £20,000 and the words, "Our family simply cannot." Now, the man beside me was guiding my every step down the corridor, terrified I would walk faster than my own heartbeat. If fate truly existed, it certainly knew how to change course, in a way that made you want to cry and laugh at the same time. As soon as we got home, Arthur did something that made me not know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't let me walk from the car park to the lift myself, but bent down, fully intending to carry me. Panicking, I grabbed the car door, whispering urgently, "What are you doing? I'm pregnant. I haven't just had my leg putina cast." Arthur froze, his arms still hovering in a carrying position. On his usually calm face appeared an overly serious expression. Dr. Harper said triplets are high risk. We must restrict movement. Restricting movement doesn't mean I've lost the ability to walk, I replied, both amused and touched. I'm a doctor too. If you keep doing this, tomorrow, the whole estate will think I've had a stroke, not that I'm pregnant. Mrs. Higgins, who was waiting by the lift doors, burst out laughing. Arthur looked at her, then at me, and finally withdrew his arms, though he kept one arm hovering behind my back like a mobile safety barrier. Inside the flat, Mia was sitting on the rug doing a puzzle. Seeing us return, late, she ran over hugging her bunny. She looked at my face, then at her father's tense posture, her eyes widening. Is Dr. Eleanor sick? I started to bend down, but Arthur was faster. He practically caught my elbow as, if he feared I would fold in half. I shot him a look. He looked a bit awkward, but didn't let go. Mia stared at the two strange adults in front of her tiny eyebrows furrowing. I sat down on the sofa, pulled the little girl closer, and spoke very slowly so she could process it. I'm not sick. It's just that. I'm going to have a baby. In my tummy. Mia stood frozen, the stuffed bunny in her hands squeezed so tightly its ears warped. A few seconds later, she muttered, "A baby?" I looked at Arthur. He was standing by the table, the 3 ultrasound photos, still in his hand, looking like a man about to announce a critical corporate Clay's decision. But in the end, he didn't speak for me. He just placed the photos on the table and turned toward Mia. I took the little girl's hand and placed it gently on my stomach, even though it was as flat as any other day. Not 1, 3 babies. The doctor said right now they are as tiny as 3. Little peas sleeping in my tummy. Mia's mouth fell open, her eyes huge. 3 peas? Yes, 3 peas, I smiled. But you can't eat these peas. Normally, that joke would have made her laugh. But today, Mia didn't laugh. She looked down at her hand resting on my stomach, her voice dropping drastically. Will the peas steal Dr. Eleanor from me? The living room fell silent. Mrs. Higgins, walking out from the kitchen, also stopped. The joy on Arthur's face seemed to be dragged down by a layer of worry. I knew this question would come eventually. A child who once feared I would replace her birth mother was now facing another fear. If I had my own biological children, would she be pushed to the sidelines? I pulled Mia up onto the sofa beside me, hugging her very gently. No one is stealing me from you. The peas aren't coming to take away your love. They are coming so that later on, 3 more people will call you Big Sister Mia, follow you around asking for stories, and maybe even annoy you by crying too. Loudly, Mia looked up, her eyes glistening with tears, but still trying to ask, if the peas cry, will you still listen to me? I will, I answered. I will listen to you. Daddy will listen to you. Mrs. Higgins will listen to you. Our family isn't a cake where the more people there are, the smaller the slice you get. Our family is like the pot of soup I make. When there are more people, we just make a bigger pot. Mrs. Higgins let out a chuckle, using the corner of her apron to dab her eyes. Arthur stood quietly for a long time before sitting down in front of Mia. He wasn't good at coaxing children with soft words, so his speech was still clumsy, but every word landed solidly. Mia is the eldest sister. Before the peas arrive, Daddy loves you. When the peas arrive, that doesn't change. Mia looked at her dad, then at me, and finally leaned down to whisper to my stomach. Did the 3 peas hear that? You're not allowed to steal Dr. Eleanor. Away from your big sister. I laughed out loud, but tears fell too. Arthur clumsily handed me a tissue, whilst Mia hurriedly touched my face. Are you hurt, Dr. Eleanor? No, I shook my head, pulling her closer. I'm just happy. From that day on, the fridge in Arthur's house officially transformed into a pregnancy command center. An appointment calendar was pinned neatly with Mia's cat magnet. Next to it was a list of vitamins, daily menus, sleep schedules, light walking routines, and a line Arthur had written himself in black ink. Do not let Eleanor skip meals. I looked at that line several times before finally turning to ask. You wrote that like an executive order. Is it for me or for yourself? Arthur was slicing an apple at the kitchen counter, his movements so careful that a single apple took nearly 10 minutes. He looked up, answering very seriously for both of us. You tend to forget to eat, and I tend to forget how to remind you properly. Mrs. Higgins couldn't hold back. If Mr. Arthur reminds you improperly, the whole house knows it. Yesterday he told me to weigh exactly 120 grams of lean protein for you as if making a prescription. A triplet pregnancy requires precise nutrition, Arthur countered. Precise nutrition doesn't mean eating dinner like filing a financial report, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Let Mrs. Higgins season it normally. Otherwise, the 3Ps will be terrified of our cooking before they're even born. Mia, sitting at her study table coloring, looked up upon hearing 3Ps and offered some very honest feedback. Daddy, babies can't eat reports. Arthur stiffened for a second. Then Mrs. Higgins, Mia, and I all burst out, laughing. The kitchen, which used to be so quiet you could hear the clock tick, now always had something to talk about. Sometimes Arthur would go online to look up a recipe for nutrient-dense salmon, buy a massive fish almost the length of his arm, and stand in the middle of the kitchen staring at it in its bag with an expression so grave you'd think he was facing a life or death mission. I had to ask Mrs. Higgins to handle it, while he stood by taking mental notes of every step, making Mrs. Higgins mutter as she worked. It's just looking after a pregnant wife, but Mr. Arthur makes me feel like I'm training a new recruit. My early days of pregnancy were not easy at all. I was often nauseous in the mornings, could eat a little at lunch but would get sleepy immediately, and by evening, just the smell of frying onions made my throat close up. Because of this, Arthur completely changed the household menu, limiting strong-smelling foods, and even quit smoking entirely, even though he previously only smoked occasionally when stressed with work. I discovered this one night when I woke up for water. I saw him standing on the balcony, holding an unopened pack of cigarettes, staring at it for a long time before throwing it straight into the bin. You don't need to go to such extremes, I said from the balcony door. Arthur turned around, looking slightly surprised at being caught. I read that cigarette smoke is bad for pregnant women. I don't smoke in the house, but the smell lingers on clothes. He spoke so calmly, as if dropping a years-long habit was just changing a shirt. You're sensitive to smells lately. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I looked at him under the yellow light spilling from the living room, my heart softening. People often say love is sweet words, flowers, gifts, holding hands, on a crowded street. But after everything I'd been through, I found that sometimes love lies in a pack of cigarettes thrown away at midnight, in a bowl of soup without onions, in the way a traditionally rigid man learns to tread lighter so his sleeping wife won't startle awake. The hospital found out about my pregnancy through Chloe. I didn't try to hide it, because carrying triplets meant I would definitely need to adjust my work schedule early. When Chloe heard, she stood frozen at the clinic door, still, holding a stack of patient appointment cards. A few seconds later, she screamed and lunged to hug me but stopped midair for fear of bumping me too hard. Oh my God, Elle, 3 of them for real? If that other family finds out, they'll to be furious enough to lose sleep for a month. I tapped her arm lightly. Don't mention them. If I don't, the news will fly there on its own anyway. Chloe lowered her voice, a mix of joy and sympathy. But don't worry. Everyone on our ward knows what kind of person you are. If that scumbag Damien comes snooping around, asking, I'll make him stand outside the gates and read the hospital rules. Chloe was half joking, but just a few days later, her words became reality. 1. Afternoon, I had just finished my routine prenatal checkup. Arthur was helping me to the car at the hospital's side entrance. Because it was drizzling, he held the umbrella tilted entirely towards me, letting his own shoulder get soaked. As he opened the car door, I suddenly noticed a shadow standing across the street. It was Damien. He wore a gray shirt, his hair messier than before, with distinct, dark circles under his eyes. He stared blankly at Arthur's hand supporting my back, his face draining of color as if he had just seen the unbelievable. I didn't know how long he had been standing there. He had probably seen Arthur bend down to adjust my scarf, seen Chloe run out to shove a bag of sour plums into my hands, seen a young nurse tease us. Looking after Dr. Eleanor this. Carefully, Mr. Arthur is going to become the head nurse soon. Those very ordinary details were likely far more painful for Damien than any reproach, because he was no longer the one with the right to step forward and ask if I was tired. He no longer had the right to stand under an umbrella and shield me from the rain. Arthur saw Damien too. His hand on my back remained steady. He didn't grip harder or try to rush me away. He just tilted his head and asked softly, Do you want me to handle this? I looked at the man across the street. The old feelings were gone, leaving only a long scar that occasionally ached in bad weather. No need, I said. Let's just go home. As the car rolled away, I saw Damien in the rearview mirror, standing petrified in front of the hospital gates, shrinking until he disappeared completely. I thought that would be enough. But there are some people who only when they see what they threw away being cherished by someone else, begin to believe they once held a jewel rather than a useless stone. And Damien's regret, from that moment on, would no longer rest quietly in his heart. That evening, as Mia pressed her ear to my stomach to listen to the 3Ps, taking a nap, my phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. She sent a photo taken from a distance. Damien was still standing in front of the hospital gates, holding his phone, looking utterly lost. Below the photo, Chloe wrote, he asked me where you live. I didn't tell him, but I'm worried he'll try to find out. Reading the message, the warmth in my heart chilled slightly. Arthur noticed my change in expression and stepped over to look at the phone. His eyes darkened, but his voice remained calm. From tomorrow, I'll drive you everywhere. If I'm busy, James will go with you. Not because you are weak, but because people who don't know boundaries don't stop at words. I wanted to tell him it wasn't necessary, but then I remembered Damien's eyes at the hospital gates. In the end, I just nodded. On the sofa, Mia was still talking to my stomach in a very serious tone. 3Ps, be good, okay? Tomorrow, big sister Mia will tell you the rest of the story about the purple cat. Arthur sat down next to me, placing his hand on my shoulder. The touch wasn't overly intimate, but it was solid. The flat was still brightly lit, the chicken soup still smelled wonderful in the kitchen. Mia was still smiling, and the starting and the my staying 3Ps were still just 3 tiny signs in my womb. The past found its way to my home on a Saturday afternoon, not with a polite knock on the door, but with the sound of a man standing at the gates of the Siebelgrants. Executive Muse, screaming my name under the annoyed glares of the neighbors. At the time, I was sitting in the living room folding muslin cloths Mrs. Higgins had bought early. Mia lay on her stomach nearby, coloring, whilst Arthur was in his study having a video call with the nursing department. Ever since finding out about the triplets, everything in the house was managed with extra care, from the weight of Mrs. Higgins's footsteps to the AC temperature. Yet, just a noise from the courtyard below was enough to make that peaceful sanctuary shudder. Damien's voice echoed through the slightly open window, hoarse and out of control. Come down here and talk to me. Stop hiding from me. The crayon in Mia's hand stopped. The little girl looked up at me, her face alarmed. I put the cloths down, trying to keep my voice light. It's all right. Darling, someone must have got the wrong house. But Damien's next sentence tore right through my clumsy shield. I know you're up there. You married him to get back at me, didn't you? Come down here, let's talk properly. Don't let that bastard lock you up in there like this. Mia was so scared she scrambled over and clung to me. Arthur threw open his study door immediately, his headset still around his neck, his face turning ice cold. James, the estate security manager, was already in the courtyard. Through the video intercom screen, I saw James standing blocking Damien, his voice calm but absolute. You are not on the guest list, nor have the residents agreed to receive you. Please leave the gate area. Damien sneered, his hair a mess, his face red with agitation. Resident? I came to find my girlfriend. What's it to do with you? You think just because you have a security gate you can hide whoever you want? Arthur walked over to my side, muttering the TV to ease Mia's panic. Go into your room with Mrs. Higgins for a bit, he told his daughter, his voice low but soft. Mummy and Daddy have to deal with something. Mia looked at me, refusing to let go of my hand. Is Dr. Eleanor going away? I stroked her hair. I'm not going anywhere. You go inside, I'll tell you the rest of the cat story in a minute. Mrs. Higgins quickly led Mia into the room, but I knew the little girl would still be standing behind the door listening. Damien's shouts outside were growing louder, causing several balcony doors to open. This estate was quiet. The residents, mostly doctors, admin staff, or hospital employees. Loud arguments were rare, and it only took a few minutes for people to get curious. Arthur picked up the intercom phone to call the security lodge. James, demand. He leaves. If he continues to cause a disturbance, file an incident report, call the police. I grabbed Arthur's wrist. Don't escalate it. The more he's pushed away, the louder he'll shout. Arthur turned his eyes to me. You don't need to go down. I know, I replied. But if I don't make it clear today, he will keep coming. Back. I don't want Mia having to listen to this constantly. Arthur fell silent. I saw the clear disagreement in his eyes, but also the respect he had maintained for me from the very beginning. He didn't like me confronting Damien, and he especially didn't want me enduring stress while pregnant. But he understood that there are doors in the past that I had to shut, with my own hands. Finally, he grabbed a thin coat, draped it over my shoulders, and lowered his voice. I'm coming with you. You'll just say a few words. If you feel uncomfortable, we go back inside immediately. All right, I nodded. I wasn't planning on playing the hero. As the lift descended, Arthur stood close beside me, one hand gently supporting my elbow. I looked at my reflection in the metal walls. My face was a bit pale, my hair tied low, wearing a loose new maternity dress even though my bump wasn't showing much yet. Just a short time ago, Damien was the man I thought I would. I signed a marriage certificate with. Now, I had to go down and face him as someone else's wife, a stepmother to a child, and a mother carrying new life. Life sometimes doesn't need years to change a person, just one painful afternoon is enough. There were a few people standing near the estate gates. Damien was blocked by James outside the boundary line. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red, his posture stripped of the neatness he had that day in the cafe. The moment he saw me walk out with Arthur, he froze. His eyes swept over Arthur's hand supporting my back, then lingered on my stomach for a long time, as if trying to find a prude sign to confirm the rumors. Damien's voice immediately softened, but the softness was so rushed it all felt fake. You finally agreed to see me. Tell me the truth, you were forced. Weren't you? I know you're not that kind of person. You wouldn't just break up with me and instantly love someone else. I stood behind the gate. Between me and him were black iron bars and the stares of the onlookers. That distance made me feel safer, and it also made me realize just how clear the boundary between us had become. I wasn't forced. I married. Of my own free will. Go home. Damien shook his head, smiling bitterly. Free will? How long have you even known him? A widower with a kid, your boss at the hospital. Did you think he really married you out of love? Wake up. You're being used. Arthur stood beside me, his face unchanging. James frowned upon hearing that, but he raised a hand, signaling it wasn't time to intervene yet. I looked at Damien, suddenly realizing his selfishness didn't lie in wanting me back, but in wanting to believe I was being used, rather than accepting that I could live well without him. When his mother slammed my medical report on the table, he had also claimed to love me. I spoke, my voice not loud but perfectly clear. When she handed over the 20,000 pounds envelope, you sat right beside her. When I asked if you thought I couldn't give you a normal family, you avoided my eyes. Now you stand here, saying you want to save me from someone else. Damien, don't you find that ridiculous? Damien's face went pale. He looked around, probably beginning to realize neighbors were hearing everything clearly. Pride made him lower his voice, but his stubbornness didn't wane. I was wrong. I admit I was wrong that day. My mother is hot-tempered. I was under pressure. But our 5 years together wasn't something you can just throw away. Give me a chance, I'll make it up to you. We can get checked again, get treated again. I don't mind anymore. A wave of mild nausea rose up. I wasn't sure if it was morning sickness or the words he had just spoken. I placed a hand on my stomach instinctively. Arthur immediately leaned in to check on me. I shook my head slightly, telling him not to worry. Damien caught that movement. His eyes changed suspicion, panic, and a bizarre spark of hope flared up. You're pregnant? He asked, his voice rough. The space around the gates fell dead silent. James stood a bit straighter, whilst Arthur placed his hand on my back more firmly, reminding me I didn't have to face this alone. I hadn't planned to say it because such happy news shouldn't be used to stab someone who once hurt me. But looking at Damien's comstay.com/in face at the desperate clinging in his eyes, I knew if I didn't sever this completely today, he would keep using the past to claim a right to my life. Yes, I said. I am pregnant. Damien took half a step back, his lips trembling, his eyes glued to my stomach. Impossible. You. The doctor said it was hard for you to have children. Hard to have children does not mean impossible. I said that in the cafe, but you didn't listen. Is it his? The question that burst from Damien's mouth was as absurd as it was pathetic. Arthur finally spoke up. His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to silence every whisper around us. She is my wife. You asking that question is an insult to her. Damien glared at Arthur, jealousy twisting his face. What do you know about her? I was with her for 5 years. I know what she likes, what she hates. I know how she cried when a patient lost a baby. I know her biggest fear is being abandoned. You just showed up when she was vulnerable. I heard those words, but my heart didn't ache like before. It was strange that Damien remembered so many things about me. Yet, when I truly needed him to remember I was a human being and not a baby-making machine, he forgot it all. Perhaps he didn't misunderstand me. He just understood and still chose the easy way out for himself. You know so much, but you still left me. That means everything you know is worthless now, I said, cutting him off before he could continue. I didn't marry to get back at you. I didn't get pregnant to prove anything to you or your mother. This baby coming into my life is between me and my husband. Not one. Baby. Arthur turned to look at me, seemingly surprised I was taking it this far, but I had made up my mind. Some truths don't need to be flaunted, but sometimes I must be spoken clearly so that those who look down on you stop suffering under the illusion that they have the right to judge. I looked straight at Damien, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I am carrying triplets. My husband's triplets. The blood drained completely from Damien's face. He stood frozen outside the gates, his eyes wide, his lips moving without making a sound. The word triplets dropped into the courtyard like a thunderbolt. A few neighbors gasped softly. James also froze for a beat before quickly looking away to remain professional. As for Arthur, after a brief moment of shock, he quietly pulled my load, coat tighter around my shoulders, his hand resting lightly on my back as if shielding me from all the stares. 3, Damien repeated, his voice cracking. Impossible. Don't say that. Just to spite me. You're not that cruel. I'm not spiting you, and I don't need you to believe me. I looked at him, feeling strangely at peace. The day you left me because of a medical report, you probably thought you lost an imperfect woman, but in reality you lost someone who truly wanted to spend the rest of her life with you. Now I have my own family. Please, do not show up again. Damien stumbled, grabbing the gatepost. His gaze shifted from me to Arthur, then back to me, as if trying to piece together a reality that was too painful. I was wrong, he whispered. I was really wrong. If I had stood by you that day. If I hadn't listened to my mother. There is no if. I cut him off. There are choices, and once made, you have to live with the consequences. Damien bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. But I no longer wanted to decipher whether it was tears or just regret over losing an asset. Arthur signaled to James. James stepped forward, his tone still polite. Mr. Damien, please leave the estate. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will file a police report. This time Damien didn't resist. He backed away step by step, his eyes still glued to me. Before turning away, he said hoarsely, my mother doesn't know about this. If she knew, surely. Your mother's business has had nothing to do with me for a long time. Arthur helped me turn back inside. When the lift doors closed, the whispers outside the gates were blocked behind us. I thought I would tremble, or cry, or at least feel vindicated. But no. Inside, there was only a very vast quiet like someone who had just put down a heavy bag they had been carrying on their shoulders for far too long. Arthur looked at my face in the lift mirror and asked softly, Are you okay? I'm just a bit tired. He didn't ask further, just held my hand. His palm was warm, steady, and slightly sweaty. I leaned lightly against the lift wall. For the first time in days, I felt the past could no longer catch up with me. But in another house, that truth had just landed like fire on oil. Damien didn't know how long he walked before he got home. When he opened the door, he saw Mrs. Harrington sitting in the living room with a young woman set up by an acquaintance. The girl, named Charlotte, wearing a tight dress and heavy makeup, a thin gold chain around her neck, was laughing and talking about wanting a flat in both their names after marriage. Mrs. Harrington frowned slightly upon hearing that, but still tried to maintain a welcoming facade, because in her mind, having a grandchild was more important than any other condition. Seeing her son walk in looking dead on his feet, Mrs. Harrington quickly stood up. Damien, you're back? Come say hello to Charlotte. You young people should have plenty to talk about. Damien didn't look at the girl. He dragged his mother into the back room and shut the door. Mrs. Harrington was annoyed. What are you doing? We have a guest. Out there, stop being so rude. Elle is pregnant, Damien said, his voice bone dry. Mrs. Harrington froze for a second, then let out a scornful laugh. She's tricking you. If that kind of woman could get pregnant so easily, the doctor wouldn't have written it on a report. Or she got knocked up by some other bloke and wants to show off to make you jealous. Damien looked up, his eyes bloodshot. It's not one, it's 3. She's carrying triplets. The smile on Mrs. Harrington's face froze solid. The room became so quiet. We could hear Charlotte tapping her fingernails on her phone screen in the living screen. Room 3. That word was like a heavy slap to everything she had ever said. The woman she had cursed as a barren tree, whom she had used 20,000 pounds to chase away, was now not only pregnant, but carrying triplets for another man. You misheard, Mrs. Harrington muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. That's impossible. She's saying that on purpose to spite our family. I heard her say it with my own ears. Damien collapsed onto a chair, holding his head in his hands. Mum, I lost her. I really lost Elle. Mrs. Harrington stood dumbfounded in the middle of the room. Greed, regret, and jealousy tangled together like snakes. If she hadn't rifled through that drawer to find the medical report, if she hadn't spat such venomous words, if she had just waited a little longer, wouldn't those 3 children bear the Harrington name? If Eleanor was still her daughter-in-law, wouldn't she now have something to boast about to all the relatives? To have grandchildren to hold, too. Have a brilliant, accommodating doctor as a daughter-in-law? But a person like Mrs. Harrington wasn't used to admitting fault for long. Just a few minutes later, that regret began to curdle into resentment. She turned to look at Damien, her voice shaking with anger. This is all your fault, I told you to break up, but you should have kept a back door open. Why did you let her get married so quickly? Now those 3 babies. Those 3 should be our grandchildren. Damien looked up at his mother, his eyes exhausted and despairing. You were the one who made me break up with her. You were the one who insulted her in front of the whole cafe. But you are a man, you have to make the decisions, Mrs. Harrington shrieked, completely forgetting that she was the one who slid the envelope of money across the table. You couldn't even keep a woman like that. A doctor with a proper job, now pregnant with triplets. You are truly an idiot. In the living room, Charlotte stood up and grabbed her handbag. She had probably heard enough. She knocked on the door, her voice icy. Mrs. Harrington, Damien, I'll be leaving now. Your family matters are too messy. I don't think we're a match for marriage. And as for a flat in my name, I don't think your family could afford it anyway. The front door slammed shut. Mrs. Harrington slumped onto the bed, her face turning green, then white. A matchmaking prospect ruined, and a former daughter-in-law she had despised was now living in a private estate, cherished by a new husband carrying triplets. That reversal left her unable to breathe. Damien sat on the edge of the bed, his voice drained. Mum, don't go looking for Elle anymore. She was right. We have no right. Mrs. Harrington didn't answer. She stared into the empty space in front of her. But in her eyes, there was no true remorse, only an obsession growing darker by the minute. She muttered very quietly as if to herself, I can't just let this go. 3 grandchildren. How can they become someone else's children? At the Street Jude's executive muse, I didn't hear those words. I only knew that evening when I returned to the flat, Mia ran out and hugged my leg, asking if there were bad people at the gates. I stroked her hair, telling her everything was over. Arthur stood behind me, not exposing the anxiety in his own eyes, but outside the glow of our small home, Mrs. Harrington's greed and regret had begun to deform, silently preparing for a storm none of us could see coming. In the days following Damien's visit to the estate, Arthur increased James's duties, ensuring he drove me to every prenatal appointment, whilst Arthur himself cut out almost all unnecessary client meetings. He didn't say he was worried, but the way he checked the doorbell camera every night, the way he reminded Mrs. Higgins to double lock the door before bed, and the way he always kept his phone next to his pillow spoke volumes. I knew he feared my past hadn't stopped, and I feared his fear would make our newly warmed home feel heavy. My pregnancy entered the 7th month. My bump grew so fast that every morning, I looked in the mirror. I felt I was turning into a different person, walking. From the bedroom to the kitchen required holding onto the wall, bending down to. Pick up a dropped cloth was practically an impossible mission. Mrs. Higgins didn't let me do anything heavy, and Mia was stricter than any adult, running over to pull my hand whenever I stood for too long. "Mummy, sit down." The 3 Ps said Mummy needs to rest. I didn't know exactly when, but the little girl had stopped calling me doctor. Eleanor. The first Mummy slipped out very naturally. One evening when I had a leg cramp, she panicked, crying and calling out, "Daddy, Mummy's leg hurts." Then the whole house fell dead silent. Mia blushed, burying her face in my chest, as if even she didn't know why she had called me that. I didn't correct her, and Arthur didn't ask. That word mummy stayed in the house like a small lamp, switched on in a dark corridor, softening the heart of everyone who walked past. Mia became the eldest sister even before the babies were born. Every evening, she brought picture books to sit beside me, pressed her cheek to my stomach, and told stories to the 3 Ps. Sometimes it was the story of a purple cat looking for a home. Sometimes it was about a child who didn't like carrots but ate them anyway because Mummy said carrots make your eyes bright. The 3 little ones in my stomach responded with kicks at highly inappropriate times, making Mia both delighted and serious as she disciplined them. P number 1, don't kick Mummy. P number 2, you can't either. If P number 3 is good, Big Sister will tell you another story. Arthur usually sat opposite us in a single armchair, holding a thick pregnancy manual bookmarked with multicolored sticky notes. A man who previously only read financial reports and operational files was now poring over pages about signs of labor, sleeping positions for multiple pregnancies, the risks of preeclampsia, and how to prepare a hospital bag. One night I woke up thirsty, saw the light on in the study, and found him sitting at his computer. On the screen was a list of hospital items categorized into different bags. Mummies. Bag, the 3 babies' bags, document bag, contingency bag, if the baby's needed. Incubators. Are you planning to open a logistics warehouse? I leaned against the Rangertis. Doorframe, both amused and touched. I'm giving birth at Street Jude's, not going. On an expedition into the deep forest. Arthur looked up, his eyes slightly red from lack of sleep. Triplets usually. Arrive early. I don't want to be missing anything when the time comes. The thing I will need most at that moment isn't muslin cloths or a thermos. Flask, I said, walking closer and placing a hand on his shoulder. I need you to be calm. He stayed silent for a few seconds, his hand covering mine. I can be calm about everything, except when it comes to you. A very quiet sentence, unpolished, yet it made my throat tight. The man who had proposed to me sounding like he was reading a project plan was now losing sleep, terrified I might lack a pair of socks in my hospital bag. Some changes don't need to be declared, just looking at the desk piled high with maternity books. And sticky notes was enough. The hospital signed me off on maternity leave entirely by the end of the 7th month. Initially, I refused because there were still a few fertility patients on my protocol, but Dr. Harper glared at me right in the clinic. Eleanor, you're a doctor, you should know when to be afraid. A triplet pregnancy is no joke. If you care for your patients, you must care for yourself and the 3 little ones first. I was speechless. Arthur, sitting beside me, looking gravely serious as, if presented with hard evidence, went home and immediately packed my scrubs away on the highest shelf of the wardrobe. He said it was a temporary administrative measure. I told him he was abusing his authority in the household. Mia, upon hearing this, raised her hand to mediate. Daddy is wrong for hiding Mummy's coat, but Mummy is also wrong because her tummy is huge and she still wants to go to work. The whole family burst into laughter. Those laughs couldn't erase the worries, but they smoothed the sharp edges of anxiety. Mrs. Higgins started prepping the baby clothes, washing the muslin cloths with a special detergent and hanging them all over the balcony. 3 small cribs were placed side by side in the nursery, in pale yellow, pale blue, and cream. Mia personally stuck 3 pieces of paper on the cribs, P1, P2, P3, the childish handwriting crooked but deeply serious. She even placed her old, stuffed bunny on the middle crib, saying that when the babies got scared, the bunny would guard their sleep. Occasionally, news of Damien and his mother still reached my ears through Chloe. She said Damien had come to the hospital a few times asking after me, but was escorted out by security. The medical equipment firm he worked for had also taken him off the Street Jude's account, fearing it would damage their relationship with the trust. As for Mrs. Harrington, after the news of my triplet pregnancy spread amongst their acquaintances, she began avoiding relatives, then suddenly started telling people that I had moved up in the world and forgotten my past, hinting that my seemingly happy life was a facade. Chloe slammed the table after telling me, "If I bump into her, I'll give her a lesson in basic decency." I just shook my head. Don't. People like her think they matter more the more you engage with them. I said that, but in my heart, I wasn't entirely at ease. Once, returning from a checkup, James showed Arthur CCTV footage from the hospital gates. Mrs. Harrington was loitering near the maternity wing, holding a bag of fruit, asking a porter what days Dr. Eleanor had her clinic. The porter didn't know, so he didn't tell her. Watching that video, Arthur's face turned to ice. He immediately ordered the security team to be on high alert and strictly reminded me not to engage if I saw Mrs. Harrington or Damien. "Don't be so tense," I said, though I felt uneasy myself. "She's just clinging to her regret and pride. She probably wouldn't dare do anything." Arthur looked at me for a very long time. People guided by greed usually don't know where to stop. That sentence stayed in my head for days, but daily life had too many small tasks to keep the big fears at bay. Nearing the 8th month, my bump was incredibly heavy. Every night I had to prop pillows on both sides just to sleep. Arthur almost entirely moved his important meetings online, setting up a temporary desk in the living room so he could handle work whilst keeping an eye on me. I once joked with him, "Your staff must hate me. Since I got pregnant, the deputy director is much stricter." He didn't look up from his laptop, answering casually, "If they hate it, I'll explain that you are the reason I still have any humanity left." I froze, then laughed so hard my stomach tightened. Mia ran over in a panic, asking if the babies were poking me. "Mrs. Higgins called out playfully from the kitchen. Mr. Arthur talks about romance, with a face like he's reading internal notices. Unbelievable. Those days, I often thought if life could just pause right here, it would be wonderful. A flat not too big, but filled with the sounds of a child, the smell of chicken soup, a clumsy man learning to speak words of love, a little girl who dared to call me Mummy, and 3 tiny lives about to be born. But reality is not a dream. The closer piece is to being grasped, the tighter one must hold on to it with both hands. About half a month before my due date, Arthur received an emergency call from the hospital. A joint rehabilitation project in a regional trust in Manchester had suffered a major compliance failure, threatening the reputation of the entire system. The manager there had just been hospitalized after an accident. Arthur's face fell the moment he put the phone down. I sat on the sofa knowing, just from his expression, that it wasn't simple. "Do you have to go?" I asked. Arthur hung up and sat next to me. "One day. 2 at most. I don't want to leave now, but if I don't go down and fix this immediately, dozens of staff there will be dragged into a massive mess." "Then go," I said, trying to smile to ease his mind. "Mrs. Higgins is here, James is here, and Dr. Harper is only a 10-minute drive away. I'm just going to sit in one spot and grow these 3 peas. I'm not planning to climb a mountain." He didn't smile. His hand rested on my stomach, slowly rubbing the fabric of my Fadian's dress. The 3 little ones seemed to recognize their father, giving a gentle kick against his palm. Arthur leaned down, kissed my stomach, and then kissed my forehead. The gesture was so slow and lingering that Mia, standing nearby, blushed and covered her bunny's eyes. "If anything happens, call me immediately," he instructed. "Don't go out alone. Don't let strangers in. If Damien or his mother show up, let James handle it. Promise me." I squeezed his hand. "I promise." "You promise me you'll fix it and come straight back. Don't drive if you're tired." Arthur nodded, but as he reached the door, he turned back several times. Mia ran after him stuffing a paper heart into his coat pocket, telling him to keep it for luck, but demanding he return it later to show the babies. He bent down to hug his daughter, looking at me one last, long time before leaving. That afternoon, after Arthur left, everything was normal. Mrs. Higgins was simmering a rich bone broth. James texted to say he had checked the estate. Cameras. Dr. Harper called to remind me to go straight to the hospital if I felt any strange pains. I sat by the window, Mia resting on my lap as I read to her. The 3 peas in my stomach occasionally shifted, like 3 little fish, swimming in a cramped pond. I thought, just get through these 2 days, Arthur. We'll be back, and the whole family can wait for the birth together. Around 5 p.m., the intercom buzzer in the hallway suddenly rang. Mrs. Higgins was bringing a bowl of broth from the kitchen. She glanced at the screen and her face went deathly pale. The spoon clinked against the porcelain bowl, a tiny, sharp sound. She turned to me, her voice trembling. Eleanor, that mother, and son are here again. On the intercom screen, Mrs. Harrington's contorted face was pressed so close to the camera I had to look for a few seconds to recognize her. Damien stood behind, her, thinner than before, his hair messy, holding a bag of fruit and a bag of pale blue baby clothes. They didn't look like guests coming for a visit, nor did they look like people coming to apologize. They looked like people who had pushed themselves into a dead end and were desperately clinging to someone else's door as their final lifeline. Inside the flat, Mia hugged her bunny in terror. The 3 peas in my stomach suddenly kicked hard, as if they too felt the foul wind blowing through the plastic door. Mrs. Higgins quickly put the bowl down and rushed to double-lock the front door. You sit still. I'm calling James. Mr. Arthur told us not to engage. I know, I nodded, one hand on my stomach, the other holding Mia's hand. It's okay, darling, I said, my voice lower than usual. Mrs. Higgins is here, Uncle. James is downstairs. Mummy won't go out. But downstairs, Mrs. Harrington began to wail. Her voice pierced through the static of the intercom, but was clear enough. Eleanor, please just come down and see me for a minute. I know I was wrong. I'm begging you. I brought things. For you and the babies, please don't be so heartless. Damien stood behind her, his face a mix of shame and desperation. He looked up at the camera, his voice hoarse. Elle, I'm not going to do anything to you. I just want to apologize for my mother. She hasn't eaten or slept for days. She knows she was wrong. Just see us for a minute. I looked at the screen, my blood turning cold. Someone who genuinely knows they are wrong doesn't choose the time when Arthur is away to show up? Someone who wants to apologize leaves that apology in a letter, through legal means, or with boundaries of respect. They do not stand outside the gates of a heavily pregnant woman carrying triplets, screaming and crying until the whole neighborhood is forced to watch. Mrs. Harrington didn't come because she cared for me. She came because the word triplets had turned her humiliation into an unbearable, suffocating regret. James appeared on the screen just minutes later. He was in his security uniform, accompanied by another guard. His voice remained calm, but firmer than last time. You do not have an appointment. The resident declines to see you. Please leave the premises. If you continue to cause a public disturbance, we will contact the police. Mrs. Harrington immediately collapsed onto the brick paving in front of the fixed lobby, beating her thighs and wailing. Oh my God, has anyone ever seen a former daughter-in-law carrying my grandchildren refusing to let me see their faces? She dumped my son, climbed the ladder into a rich house, and turned her back on. Her past. I just want to see her for a minute. And you people are bullying an ordinary citizen like this? Several balcony doors on the lower floors opened. A few residents walking through the lobby stopped. Damien bent down to pull his mother up, but she swatted his hand away, crying even louder. Eleanor, I know I misspoke back then, but you have to reconsider. You and Damien loved each other for 5 years. These babies in your stomach. You say they belong to that man, but are they really? I won't believe it unless you come down and tell me clearly. Mia burst into tears the moment she heard that. I pulled the little girl into my seat-talon arms, a violent wave of anger crashing through my chest. Mrs. Harrington had previously humiliated me for struggling to conceive, and now she dared stand below my building, implying the children in my womb were illegitimate. I could tolerate it for my own sake, but I could not let Mia hear those filthy words. nor could I allow my unborn children to be dragged out as tools for her greed. Mrs. Higgins grabbed my arm when she saw me stand up. Eleanor, no! If Mr. Arthur finds out I let you go down, he'll kill me. I'm not going alone, I said, trying to breathe slowly to ease the tightness in my stomach. Call Dr. Harper for me. Tell her to prepare herself in case I have to go to the hospital. I'm just going down to say a few words in front of the Kersley. Cameras and security. If I don't cut this off today, they will keep coming. Tears welled up in Mrs. Higgins's eyes. But you're about to give birth. Exactly because I'm about to give birth, I cannot let them come here screaming outside my door every single day. I turned to Mia, wiping away her tears. Mia, go to your room with Mrs. Higgins. I'll be back up once I'm done talking. The little girl hugged my stomach tightly, sobbing. Mummy, don't go. You promised you wouldn't leave me. That sentence squeezed my heart. I bent down to kiss her hair, my hands shaking, but my voice steady. Mummy isn't leaving you, I'm just going down to the lobby. Uncle James is there, the cameras are there. You count to 100, and Mummy, we'll be back up. Mia didn't want to let go, but Mrs. Higgins picked her up and carried her into the room. I put on my coat and flat shoes, leaning against the wall, taking each step to the lift. My heavy stomach pulled me forward. Every step was slow and arduous. In my heart, I knew Arthur would be furious if he saw this scene, but there are moments when a woman cannot just sit behind a door and let others sling mud at her family. The lift opened on the ground floor. James saw me and rushed over, startled. Eleanor, why did you come down? Mr. Arthur said. I know, I interrupted, keeping my voice low. You stand right next to me. The cameras are recording, right? Recording everything. Good. The moment Mrs. Harrington saw me, she immediately stopped crying. Her eyes, locked onto my stomach, filled with a mix of craving and jealousy. That look made my scalp prickle. Damien also froze, his face deathly pale. Perhaps this was the first time he truly saw how massive my bump was. The reality of 3 children was no longer just a phrase at the gate, but a living truth making me walk heavily right in front of him. Damien choked out. You're so thin. I didn't look at him for long. Say whatever you came to say quickly. After today, if you come here to cause a disturbance again, I will file a police report. Mrs. Harrington scrambled up, lunging forward to grab my sleeve, but James blocked her instantly. Stopped, she switched to an expression of sheer agony. Eleanor, I'm begging you, I was wrong. I was stupid that day. I was possessed by demons to say those hurtful things. Forgive me, forgive Damien. Come back to. Damien, can you? Our family will give you a proper wedding. I will treat you like a queen. Those little ones, when they're born, I'll treat them like gold. A few murmurs rippled through the onlookers. I thought I would tremble with rage. But strangely, in that moment, all I saw in front of me was a pathetic, shameless display. This woman didn't see me. She only saw my stomach. She saw the 3 babies she wanted to snatch back under the title of her grandchildren. Mrs. Harrington, I spoke, dropping all formalities. Listen carefully. I am the legal wife of Arthur Harrison. The children in my womb are my husband's children. Damien and I ended the day you slammed my medical report on the cafe table and used 20,000 pounds to chase me away. You have no right to call me your daughter-in-law, and you certainly have no right to claim my children as your grandchildren. Mrs. Harrington's face turned crimson. How can you say that? You and my son were together for 5 years. If that other bloke hadn't swooped in at the right time, you would be my daughter-in-law. These 3 babies should have been. Should have been. I cut her off, my voice turning to ice. Your son should have protected me that day. You should not have rifled through my private belongings to steal my medical report. No one should have the right to call a woman a barren tree just because she struggles to conceive. But you did, Damien. Stayed silent. And I left. It's as simple as that. Damien bowed his head, his lips trembling. I know I was wrong. You can curse me all you want, but my mother really hasn't been well these last few days. She keeps saying she wants to see you, wants to see her grandchildren. Do not call my children your grandchildren in front of me, I said. You have no right. That sentence made Damien recoil as if he'd been struck, but Mrs. Harrington couldn't take it anymore. The begging vanished from her face, replaced by the Prostons. familiar viciousness from the cafe that day. She pointed a finger at me, shrieking, "Don't think just because you married a man with a bit of power. You're so great. You two-faced bitch. Who knows if the 3 brats in your belly are really your husband's? If you're so clever, give birth to them and get a DNA test." My blood boiled. James immediately shouted, "Watch your mouth. Everything is being recorded." I placed a hand on my stomach, trying to steady my breathing. A dull ache suddenly rolled through my lower abdomen, not sharp yet, but enough to make me pause. Perhaps it was from standing too long, perhaps from the anger. I knew I had to stop. "James, escort them off the estate. I'm going up." Just as I turned around, Mrs. Harrington lunged forward. She shoved past the gap between James and the other guard, grabbed my sleeve, and screamed, "You're not going anywhere. You have to give my grandchildren back to our family." I jerked back in shock, my foot slipping on the freshly mopped floor tiles. James lunged to pull Mrs. Harrington away, and Damien yelled out for his mother. But I lost my balance. In the split second my back tilted backward, time seemed to stretch endlessly. I only had time to wrap my arms around my stomach. Flashing through my mind was Mia's face, Arthur's face, the 3 tiny ultrasound photos tucked in my drawer. The fall wasn't too hard because James managed to catch part of my shoulder, but a sharp cramp immediately seized my lower abdomen. A warm stream slipped down my legs. I looked down to see the hem of my pale dress blooming with red. Every sound around me exploded. Mrs. Higgins ran out of the lift, screaming. Mia's cries calling for Mummy echoed through the intercom. Mrs. Harrington stood, frozen, her face turning white as a sheet, as if snapping out of a manic. "Episode. Call an ambulance," James roared. "Call Dr. Harper now." I lay on the cold tiles of the lobby, clutching my stomach. Wave after wave of cramping pain rolled through me, bringing out a cold sweat. In the panic, I heard Damien stammering, I didn't mean to." But his voice faded away. I just gripped James's arm, whispering, "Call Arthur. Tell him to save my babies." The ambulance arrived very quickly since the hospital was only a few minutes away. Blue lights flashed against the lobby walls. The sound of stretcher wheels grinding against the tiles, Dr. Harper's voice calling out my blood pressure, foetal heart rates, ordering an IV line. I was pushed into the ambulance amidst Mia's cries. Mrs. Higgins held her back, the little girl screaming herself hoarse. Mummy promised she would count to 100. Mummy promised. I wanted to open my eyes to look at her, to tell her Mummy wasn't breaking her. Promise. But the pain dragged me down. As the ambulance doors closed, Dr. Harper put her phone on speaker. Arthur's voice came through from the other end, so, panicked and hoarse, I almost didn't recognize it. "Where is Elle? What's her condition?" "Triplets, suspected premature labor after trauma. There's bleeding." "We are taking her to the operating theater right now," Dr. Harper said rapidly. "Get back as fast as you can, but do not drive if you are losing your mind." A brief silence, then Arthur's voice dropped. Every word sounded as if it were being forced through gritted teeth. "Keep her alive at all costs. Keep her and the babies alive." I heard that sentence just before my consciousness faded completely. The hospital that night was blindingly bright. As I was wheeled into the place, operating theater, familiar faces of colleagues flashed past like disjointed film frames. Chloe was crying but still managed to hold my arm steady to insert the IV line. Dr. Harper leaned down close to my ear. "Eleanor, listen to me. You are at the hospital. The neonatal team is here. You have to save your strength. The 3 babies need you." I tried to answer, but my lips only moved silently. Another contraction hit, the pain so intense that every nerve felt twisted. On my stomach, the fetal monitor beeped frantically. An anesthetist said, "I'm going to administer a spinal block for an emergency C-section. Relax." I was a doctor. I understood every step they were taking, understood the risks of an emergency premature C-section of triplets following trauma. Because I understood, I was even more terrified. As I was prepped, I only thought of Arthur. Where was he on the motorway? Would he make it to stand outside the theater? Was he blaming himself for going on the business trip? And Mia, was she terrified that I was just like her birth mother, going into a hospital and never coming back? The thought made tears stream down my temples. I squeezed Chloe's hand tight, my voice cracking. If anything happens to me? Chloe leaned down, her eyes red but her voice sharp. Don't talk nonsense, Elle. How many mothers have you pulled back from death's door? Today, it's our turn to pull you. You lie still, understood? I burst into tears. Amidst the whir of machinery, the clatter of instruments, and the doctors reading out vitals, Chloe's scolding felt like a rope pulling me out from the abyss. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe as instructed. When the surgery began, I didn't feel sharp pain, only pulling, pressure, and a nameless terror running down my spine. The first cry rang out weak, thin like a kitten's meow. Someone said, "Baby one is out, boy. Transfer to neonatal." Before I could even cry, the second cry followed, softer but clear. "Baby two, girl." Then, a silence that dragged on for too long. My heart felt like it stopped beating. Dr. Harper called for backup. The sound of a suction machine whirred. Chloe squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. After a few seconds, that felt like a lifetime. The third cry broke out. Weak, but real. "Baby three. Boy. All three. Have reflexes. Move them to the incubators now." I wept silently. My 3Ps were born far too early, far too small, but they were crying. But my own body felt like it was turning to ice. The doctor mentioned I had lost a lot of blood. My uterus wasn't contracting well due to the multiple pregnancy, and I needed immediate intervention. Professional. Medical terms flew past my ears, terrifyingly familiar. I wanted to ask how much they weighed, wanted to see each of their faces, but my eyes grew heavier. Right before slipping into the dark, I thought I heard the theater doors swing, open violently somewhere far away. Nobody would let Arthur into the sterile zone, but his hoarse voice echoed from a distance. "Elle, I'm back! Can you hear?" "May, I'm back?" I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. In the encroaching darkness, the only thing holding onto me was an invisible hand and a very old promise. "Tomorrow I will still be here." I had promised Mia. I couldn't leave. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was a parched throat and a dull ache in my abdomen, as if someone had placed a hot stone there. The light in the recovery room was dimmer than the operating theater. The steady beep of the BlanQ LTA monitor sounded by my ear. A hand was gripping mine incredibly tight, warm, and trembling. I forced my eyes open. Arthur was sitting by the bed. Stubble lined his jaw, his shirt was a mess, and his eyes were so bloodshot he looked years older. He leaned in immediately when he saw I was awake. "Elle, can you hear me?" My lips were cracked, my voice just a breath. The babies?" Arthur squeezed his eyes shut for a second, like someone finally taking a breath. After hours of holding it, when he opened them, a tear dropped straight onto the back of my hand. This man who never knew how to speak tender words was now holding my hand with both of his voice shaking uncontrollably. "All three are alive. They're very small, they have to be in incubators. But the doctor says there's good hope. And you made it through too. Elle, you came back too. Me." Seeing him cry, my own tears spilled over. The recovery room lights weren't bright, the air smelled of antiseptic, and the machines hummed coldly. But I knew I had passed through the most terrifying door, and I could still hear the man I loved calling my name. Behind a glass panel somewhere far away, 3 tiny babies were fighting to stay in this world. And out in the hospital corridors, my past had finally wrought consequences that could not be erased by an apology. The moment I was rushed into the operating theater, James had handed over all the CCTV footage from the lobby and the lifts, along with his incident report, to the local police. Mrs. Harrington was brought in for questioning that same night. Damien followed, his face drained of blood, constantly repeating that his mother didn't mean to do it. But there are things that cannot be brushed away with the words "didn't mean to," especially when the person shoved was a woman, carrying triplets, resulting in an emergency premature birth, severe blood loss, and 3 infants fighting for every breath in incubators. I learned about this 2 days after waking up. Arthur hadn't wanted to tell me, but I saw James visit the hospital, saw him hand Arthur a stack of papers, and saw my husband's face darken terrifyingly. When I asked, Arthur sat by the bed, in silence for a long time before finally saying, "I have filed a formal request for legal prosecution." The cameras clearly show her lunging, pulling, and pushing you, causing the fall. Damien was present but didn't physically touch you. The police are taking statements. Lying on the hospital bed, my incision aching every time I breathed deeply, my milk supply struggling, and my 3 babies still in the neonatal unit, hearing still Mrs. Harrington and Damien's names didn't ignite a burning rage in me anymore. There was only a bone-deep exhaustion. I don't want you going too far because of me. Arthur squeezed my hand. His eyes were stern but not cold toward me. I am not going too far. I am doing what is appropriate. If James had been a second slower to catch you, if Dr. Harper had arrived a few minutes later, I could have lost all 4 of you. Elle, this is no longer a personal squabble. I couldn't argue. Part of me was still a doctor, well aware of how perilous a premature triplet birth was. The other part was a mother who hadn't even been able to hold her babies yet, only able to see them through photos Arthur secretly took from the NICU. They were so small my hands shook looking at them. The eldest boy weighed just over 3 pounds. The second girl was even smaller. The youngest boy required breathing support longer than his siblings. 3 tiny hospital bands reading baby 1, baby 2, baby 3 were wrapped around wrists, as thin as leaf stems. The first time I was wheeled down to the NICU to see my babies through the Bosberti glass, I cried so hard I couldn't stand. I had seen countless premature babies, had reassured countless mothers that the machines weren't something to fear, that they were just helping their babies grow stronger. But when the ones in the place, incubators were your own, all professional knowledge turned into sharp needles. I pressed my hand against the glass, crying endlessly. Arthur stood behind my wheelchair, a hand resting on my shoulder. His eyes were red too, but his voice was steady. The doctor says they are responding well. The youngest is a bit weaker, but has passed the critical window. We'll take it one day at a time, Elle. Mia was brought to the hospital by Mrs. Higgins. The next day, wearing the pale, yellow dress I loved, holding her old bunny, she burst into tears the moment she saw me. Arthur lifted her onto the bed beside me, reminding her to be gentle. Because Mummy was still in pain, Mia touched the back of my hand, sobbing. Mummy promised she would count to 100 and come back. I counted to 1,000 and Mummy still wasn't back. Those words broke me. I hugged her with my one free arm, my incision throbbing with pain, but I couldn't bear to let her go. Mummy is sorry. I came back late, but I did come back. Mia nodded repeatedly, tears soaking my collar. A while later, she followed Arthur to the NICU window. Through the glass, she stood on her tiptoes, looking at the 3 tiny babies, her face a mix of fear and love. She placed a hand against the glass and whispered, as if afraid to startle them. Big sister Mia is here. The 3 Ps need to grow up fast. Mummy is in so much pain you can't make her worry anymore. Mrs. Higgins turned away to cry. Arthur bent down to lift Mia higher so she could see clearly. That scene, even remembering it now, makes my eyes sting. Family doesn't necessarily have to start with perfect bloodlines, nor does it grow through brilliant promises. Sometimes it is patched together stitch by stitch through the act of staying. Through a child learning to call someone Mummy again, through a man standing outside an incubator holding his daughter's hand, waiting for 3 fragile babies to grow stronger day by day. Mrs. Harrington's case was handled without much fanfare but with absolute clarity. She was charged with causing grievous bodily harm to a pregnant woman and ordered to pay compensation for the resulting medical expenses. Arthur's lawyers followed procedure exactly. They didn't embellish. They didn't use connections to push for a harsher sentence. But they also didn't allow anyone to spin it as an accidental scuffle. The cameras had recorded everything. Her slander, her hand grabbing my clothes, the shove that made me lose my balance, the blood on the lobby floor. The truth, backed by video and witnesses, left no honors NTU. Room for crying and begging. Damien came to the hospital once, but Arthur didn't let him into my room. I only knew because Chloe told me. He stood in the lobby, holding a bag of baby clothes, looking haggard. He begged to see you just to say sorry, she said. Arthur went down to meet him instead. The 2 men spoke in the corner of the plan corridor for quite a while. Chloe, curious, stood at a distance and overheard bits of it, coming back both angry and sympathetic. Damien had said, I know my mum was wrong and I was wrong. Just let me see Elle. Once. I'm not asking for her forgiveness. I just want to know if she and the babies are okay. Arthur replied very calmly. Whether she is okay or not is no longer any of your business. If you truly realize you were wrong, leave her in peace. Hearing that, I lay on my hospital bed looking out the window. The sun was shining, the leaves in the hospital courtyard fluttering gently. I thought I would cry or at least feel my heart stir, but no. The name Damien now felt like a very heavy object that had been set down somewhere far away. I didn't hate him. Enough to wish him a lifetime of suffering, but I didn't love him enough to ever want to look back at him again. Chloe later told me that Damien's firm terminated his contract due to the IA disturbances he caused at the hospital, compounded by his mother's scandal, affecting partner relations. Mrs. Harrington was remanded in custody awaiting trial. Her health rapidly declined, but she never dared near the Street Jude's estate again. Damien sold the flat he was paying the mortgage on to cover legal fees and compensation, and eventually left London, moving up north to start over at a small regional branch. The day he left, he asked me to pass you a letter, but I didn't take it, Chloe said. I told him, if it's an apology, keep it and learn to live a better life. If it's him begging you back, then there's even less reason for you to read it. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Dr. Eleanor, you really have changed. I smiled faintly. It's not that I've changed, it's just that I finally realize I don't need to wait for anyone to validate that I am worthy of being loved. The 3 babies stayed in the incubators for nearly a month and a half. That was the longest period of my life. Every day I pumped milk on a strict schedule, noting every milliliter in a notebook, anxiously waiting for the doctor to announce each baby's weight. We named the first boy Aiden, hoping he would always be safe after arriving, so prematurely. The second girl was Nora, the little girl who Mia insisted had eyes, just like mine. The youngest boy was Miles, the weakest but the most stubborn, always clenching his tiny fists as if ready to fight the world. Arthur officially registered their names after consulting me very carefully, but at home, Mia still called them P1, P2, and P3. She said she gave them those names first, so no one was allowed to change them. The day the 3 babies were discharged, Arthur prepared as if escorting a high-level diplomatic delegation home. 3 infant car seats were lined up perfectly in the back. Bags of muslin cloths, bottles, medical files, and medication were checked and double-checked. Mrs. Higgins woke up at the crack of dawn to make me a rich bone broth, then worried I might be sick of it. Mia wore her best dress, standing in front of the mirror, practicing her greeting. Welcome home, little ones. I am Big Sister Mia. I am a bit strict, but I love you. I carried Nora, while Arthur carried the 2 boys under the nurse's guidance. His face was so tense that the nurses couldn't help but laugh. One teased, Mr. Arthur directs everyone at the hospital so flawlessly. Why are you trembling? Holding a baby? He looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms and replied, It's different. If I direct a project wrong, I can fix it. If I hold him wrong, it hurts him. The whole room laughed. I laughed too, but tears fell again. I used to think I'd struggle to ever have children and was humiliated by that very thought. Now, I sat in a wheelchair, holding 3 tiny but fiercely resilient lives. Beside me was a husband who was more afraid of holding a baby wrong than of a board. Meeting with the trust executives. Life is truly strange. It can throw you to the absolute bottom with a medical report, then pull you right back up with 3 fragile cries in an operating theater. The flat at the Executive Mews on the day we brought the babies home was louder and more crowded than it had ever been. 3 cribs stood side by side in the nursery. Mia's stuffed bunny lay in the middle like a loyal gatekeeper. Muslin. Cloths covered the balcony. Baby bottles packed a corner of the kitchen. The cries of 3 babies took turns ringing out, making Arthur for the first time in his life unsure of what to prioritize. He had just finished changing Aiden when Miles started crying. As he picked Miles up, Nora began to fuss. Mia stood in the middle of the room, directing traffic. Daddy, P number 2 doesn't like how you wrap the blanket. Mummy does it better. Arthur looked at me pleadingly. I sat leaning back on the armchair, my incision still aching, but my heart was so full it couldn't contain it all. You have to learn yourself. You were the one who said affection can be fostered over time. He froze, then burst out laughing. I didn't realize fostering affection came with fostering nappy-changing skills. Mrs. Higgins laughed until she cried. Mia solemnly patted her dad's shoulder. Daddy, you can do it. Our family has lots of babies now, you have to be brave. One afternoon later, when the sunlight fell softly through the curtains, I sat in the living room rocking Nora to sleep in my arms. Aiden and Miles were sleeping soundly in their cribs. Mia sat on the floor, drawing a new picture. This time, there weren't just 3 silent figures in front of the house. There were many people. A tall daddy, a mummy with her hair tied low, a big sister in a yellow dress, and 3 babies as round as balloons. There was Mrs. Higgins by the soup pot, and Uncle James outside the gate. On the roof, she had drawn a Bravo 7 massive heart. Arthur walked out from the kitchen holding a cup of warm chamomile tea for me. He placed the cup down and sat beside me, his eyes resting on the 3 babies. Before moving to me, the stressful months had made him lose weight, but in his eyes was a kind of peace I had never seen before. Elle, he called softly. Yes? That day, I said we should be companions. He looked at me, his voice deep and slow. At the time, I thought a home only needed responsibility to be enough. Someone to look after Mia, someone to eat dinner with, to keep a stable routine. I didn't think I could ever love anyone in a different way. I looked at little Nora's hand loosely wrapping around my finger. But now, Arthur reached around to support my back very gently, terrified I was still in pain. Now I don't just want a companion, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, raising Mia, raising these 3 little ones, and raising all the vulnerable parts that you and I used to have to hide away. If my proposal sounded like a handover meeting that day and made you feel slighted, then today, I want to say it properly. Elle, I love you, not because you gave me 3 children, but because you walked into this cold house and turned it into a home. I bowed my head. A tear slipped down and landed on Nora's cheek. The little girl scrunched her face and let out a tiny whine, as if objecting to her mother, making her wet. Mia looked up from her drawing, panicked. Mummy's crying again. Did Daddy hurt Mummy? Arthur instantly looked flustered. Daddy didn't. I burst out laughing through my tears, pulling Mia closer with my good arm. No, Mummy is just happy. Mia looked suspiciously at her dad, then at me, and finally let out a very grown-up sigh. Adults cry when they're happy and cry when they're sad. It's so confusing. We all laughed. That laughter mingled with the fussy coos of the 3 babies. The sound of Mrs. Higgins' soup bubbling in the kitchen. The sound of James calling up from the courtyard to say there was a parcel. It was all so ordinary. Not brilliant, not perfect. But it was in that ordinary life that I knew I had been saved. Many years later, when I look back, I still think about that medical report, sitting in the middle of the cafe table. It had seemed like a death sentence. That cost me a 5-year relationship and shattered my faith in the man I was. It's going to marry. But it turns out, some things that look like full stops are actually just painful detours. If Damien hadn't let go that day, I might have spent forever trying to prove I was good enough in a house that didn't know how to respect me. If Mrs. Harrington hadn't been so cruel, I might never have met Arthur at exactly the moment I needed to hear that struggling to conceive doesn't make a woman inferior to anyone else. I don't know if fate is absolutely fair, but I know that a woman should never be priced by her reproductive ability, nor should she ever have to beg for love from people who only love her when she meets their demands. Whether you have children or not, whether you have 1 or 3, none of it defines a woman's dignity. Dignity lies in how you stand up after being humiliated, how you choose a worthy person to walk alongside, and how you remain gentle after life has hurt you so many times. That afternoon, I rested my head on Arthur's shoulder. Mia sat beside us, coloring her picture and singing a nursery rhyme with the wrong lyrics. The 3 babies slept in their cribs, occasionally startling and waving their tiny arms like young shoots reaching for the light. Out on the balcony, the miniature oj, climbing rose from that year, had bloomed anew. On one branch, there was still the thorn that had once made Mia cry for fear I would leave. I looked at that thorn, then at Arthur's hand holding mine. My heart felt as light as the air after a long rain. Our marriage began with the word companionship. No flowers, no rings, no declarations of love. But ultimately, it was in this very house, a house I thought was cold, that I found a husband who feared my pain more than he feared losing face, a daughter who learned to call me Mummy, and 3 babies who came into the world as the most tender response to all the wounds I had ever endured. Only then did I understand that happiness doesn't always arrive through the door you expect. Sometimes it comes after a very hard fall, through a weak cry in an arid incubator, through a trembling hand holding yours, saying, "You came back to me." Yes, some people walk out of our lives leaving a very deep wound, but that same wound can open a new path where we finally see our true worth. A woman does not deserve to be judged by childbirth, and she certainly shouldn't have to bow to those who only love her when she fulfills their desires. In a marriage, what keeps people together isn't the beautiful promises made at the start, but respect, responsibility, and a hand that doesn't let go when the other is at their weakest. I hope that after this story, each of us learns to love ourselves more, knows when to walk away from places that look down on us, and knows how to cherish those who quietly bring us peace. If it were you, would you forgive your ex? After everything, please leave a comment, click like, and subscribe to the Fonjus channel to hear more deeply emotional real-life stories.